The scientific revolution starts now.
This is the Science Podcast.
Let us see in the dark.
So I saw that the estimates for the domestication of dogs are anywhere between 15 to 40,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a sense of what is accurate on that scale? How long ago are we talking here?
I'm glad we have 4 hours because this is it boils down to your definition of species, which people have been debating since Plato and Linnaeus. But the current consensus that I would go with on, at least we'll start with dogs, is if you take a bunch of modern dog DNA and compare it to ancient wolves and like ancient dog finds, the most matched with current dog DNA appears about 20,000 years ago. So we can say the current subspecies of dog, or at least of wolf that we call a dog, appears 20,000 years ago.
And where is that?
Siberia.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty neat. But the main thing with that is, like, I'm sure you guys knew Pokemon when you were younger too. Like, it doesn't just evolve like by pressing a button. Like it's not overnight. So it's a slow and gradual, either natural or artificial selection in the case of the dog. And when you find a wolf skull in a cave in Siberia that looks a little different than the other one, is it a dog? Is it a wolf? Not sure. So the best you can do is do genetic testing and see what matches the most. But I personally find dogs to be a subspecies of gray wolf. So it's the same species. It can all interbreed. So at what point, it's just nomenclature, and I view species kind of like sexuality, or what would be that one? Autism's on a spectrum. Species is a spectrum that we assign a label to. Yeah.
Because I always think about this in terms of current dog breeds. If you were an archaeologist 40,000 years from now, and you were coming across all of these different skulls of Chihuahua, Rottweiler, Pit Bull, would you be able to reconstruct that they're the same species?
It's a really good way to put it. I've actually not been asked that. Genetically, yes, you would be able to tell. But
how different are they genetically, though? Oh, they're almost not different genetically, you're saying. Sorry.
Like a pug, poodle, and German shepherd are the same species. Like they can all interbreed. Sure, there's phenotypical things just like among humans, like blonde hair, blue eyes, darker skin. Like those are all just slight variations among the same species. Which is the incredible thing about dogs, is why people can't grasp that they're wolves sometimes, is a Chihuahua is a wolf. It's just a biologically coded wolf to be very small. Like it's kind of wild. But back then, yeah, you would probably, without genetic testing, not know. You would just, like, this is a different animal entirely.
It's crazy how fast you can change the phenotype of something. I think about that all the time in terms of humans. Like, how different do we even look, I wonder, from people? Like, sometimes I see these photographs of people from 100 years ago, and I'm like, I think they look really different from us, like in the face and just the way they carry themselves. It's kind of fascinating. So I know there's like that famous study with the Arctic foxes where they basically domesticate them and I think they just select for friendliness, but they end up getting all these different colors and their ears get floppy, and just so wild how fast these things can change. Because we usually think of like high school biology, or like evolution takes millions of years and so forth, but these things happen like in a matter of generations.
Yeah. And that's with human intervention on that one too. And it happened, I think it's 13 or so generations that they turned into domestic foxes. But whether, if it was natural selection that wolves naturally came to adapt to life among Homo sapiens, could have taken thousands of years to do that. If humans and wolves were stuck in that glaciated environment in Siberia and just kind of had to get along, hunting the same prey and having similar social systems, maybe humans did exert some kind of pressure onto them to make them become that very quickly. But it's
It
just
seems like it would be really useful to have a dog around that can help you hunt.
yeah.
Or as an alarm system.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I was walking with a friend in Georgia a few years ago when I lived there, just like on an afternoon walking around with her dog. And we were in a cul-de-sac, and every house had a dog that was just barking, and it was kind of echoing, and it was like we couldn't hear each other. And like I looked at her, she's an archaeologist too, and I was like, how did people live without that? Like how like what was that like? And dogs are only 20,000 years old genetically, probably older than that a little bit. So it must have just been fire, or animals didn't go around humans or something. I don't know, but it just fundamentally must have changed when you had a walking Boston Dynamics robot that could tell you, like, when something is around and whatnot, and then hunt and then clean for you and do everything. Yeah.
Let's lay out the timelines of this a little bit because my numerosity is a little bit shaky. So when we talk about dogs emerging, you said that the best evidence that we have is 20,000 years ago, roughly?
Currently, yeah.
Okay, so let's say 20,000 years ago. And you said that this came out of Siberia?
Mhm.
Okay, so how long has Homo sapiens been around?
And by the way, Siberia was rather temperate during the last glacial maximum, which is kind of fascinating, right?
Yeah, yes. 40,000 years ago? I don't know if
I
it
think
was.
20, we said.
20,000 years ago.
20,000 years
Oh,
ago.
yeah,
I mean,
it would have been.
yeah, it's really fascinating because the whole northern, in North America was covered in a big piece of ice, kilometers thick. But actually, that glacier seems to have been centered over Greenland, not over the North Pole, which is really fascinating. So it opened up Siberia, which was quite temperate at the time. So I wonder if that had anything to do with people congregating up there and finding good habitat.
That makes a lot of sense because there's a lot of activity in Siberia in the Ice Age, which I've always found to be why. So that makes sense then. I guess I must have read that at some point. It just didn't click with me, or just maybe I didn't. But yeah, that's something new I learned today. So.
Well, it's kind of a poorly known theory, right? Because when we see visualizations of the Ice Age, we see just this Earth that has the ice caps that kind of go all the way down.
Like the seasons.
Yeah, like the seasons, exactly. But we had this guy on our show who was a geologist who was super into glaciations, and he realized when he was looking at maps of North America that, like, hey, hold on a second. There's, like, very good evidence for the ice cap to have been centered on Greenland. And so the reason that North America and Europe were glaciated was that the pole was in a different place and Siberia remained relatively ice-free, like Shiloh was saying.
At least the climactic pole, whatever that means.
Yeah.
But yeah, so can you paint me a picture of how you think this all went down, maybe? That would be kind of a fun place to start. Like, why dogs? Why not cats or something? Why not freaking crocodiles or something? Like, what happened in your best imaginative? Feel free to speculate. I just am curious, like, where your mind is at with putting this story together.
Yeah, if I ramble and tangent, just you stop me. But I would say, I mean, first of all, against species, it's hard to say when Homo sapiens, or Homo sapiens sapiens, what we are currently where we're at. Because that would also imply how much more human are you than me. Because if we're assigning a species name or something, so that's a whole other thing with humans. But let's just get at modern Homo sapiens leave Africa, and they start replacing Neanderthals in Europe, in the Middle East, Denisovans in Asia, which also Siberia, and those start creating. I say this, waves and waves of more modern Homo sapiens come out of Africa, replace those populations, which is why they're all human now. And the ones that were in Siberia, and there's wolves in Europe too, but it just seems that in Siberia, the interaction between humans and wolves was very prominent. And we both hunt reindeer or caribou, and very well. And this is speculation, I would imagine that humans just like when you're in a new environment, you want to see what animals eat what food to make sure it doesn't poison you or make you trip balls. So you need to. I don't know if I'm allowed to curse. My bad. But
Yeah, you can curse all you want.
okay,
If it makes it in so much as it relaxes you.
sweet. Yeah,
I'll try to keep up.
Yeah, but you want to see what animals are eating what, and if you see a caribou that you've never seen before in Africa, it's similar to an antelope or an ibex, or not ibex, but impala. There you go.
Hmm.
You might watch wolves do it, see how they do it, pick out the weakest one, the slowest one, and then humans would be like, okay, let me do that. So you'd probably watch a lot of that, and then with wolves being extremely efficient social predators that have very complex social systems as well, similar to primate ones, I would say, not as complex as chimpanzee ones, but wolf social behavior is very complex.
You mean that they have essentially some sort of dominance hierarchy set up?
More or less, like it's the alpha thing is kind of a myth that's been debunked. That's just appears in captivity, but they do live in nuclear families that have, a social system, and there's a constant changing of not who's in charge, but like, it's kind of like people. It just changes a lot.
Like
we
people,
have a listener who lived in Alaska who's been sending us stories and journals of his time there, and he basically built a cabin in Alaska and then moved there for a year with some supplies but no technology. It was no electricity. He just lived in it, and there was a pack of wolves that lived nearby, and so he spent a lot of time observing them, and he was amazed by the depth to which they had customs and rules, and the way that there was a social structure that was enforced, and the way that they would seem to celebrate when a wolf that had been gone for a long time would come back. And so they have these very obvious social dynamics when you're able to watch them for a long enough period of time, which is a rare treat in the modern world, I think.
For sure. And one thing I always feel guilty about, like talking about dogs and, as if I was there to see it, but I've never seen wolves in person, not in captivity, to like be able to say all this for sure, just going off of what I've read and heard from people. But yeah, it seems for the most part, like their social systems are on paper that complex. And it's kind of evident now. Like you can see, like a lot of human societies, especially indigenous and Eastern ones, view wolves like we have some kind of kinship with them. So it very prominent, even in Norwegian or Norse mythology. So there's some affinity there for them, or reverence, or just similarities between us. But regardless, it helped. Like if there was an outcast from the wolf pack or one that got kicked out, that happens. Like a stray one needs food. Bottom line is like it exerts less calories to scavenge a human camp than it is to hunt a giant bison, So they would have figured that out. And over time that probably happened more and more. And you can see that with possums and raccoons today. Like they hang out in the trash. Bears still do it. Dogs still do it, clearly. Just that type of thing. And with humans being so similar socially and wolves being similar socially, they could just adapt to our social systems pretty easily. Yeah. Other animals
makes
don't
sense.
do that.
Yeah, yeah. That makes sense with regards to the cats or something. Like we have a cat, and the cat has no social skills whatsoever as far as humans are concerned, which is really interesting. Like I guess when it comes down to like, because my first question was like, how does a dog that's used to existing in this pack make the transition to living with humans? And it seems like the answer is, well, because humans are pack animals too, and so it kind of slots right in this familiar way to the animal.
The domestication of cats seems like it would be that the cats decided that they wanted to manipulate the humans. It would be a very different arc, where I feel like our cat fits into the social structure of the house by demanding things. I've never had dogs, and so this is kind of an interesting conversation for me, because Shiloh had dogs growing up his entire life. His parents have dogs, and they're completely foreign animals to me. I don't totally understand them. I don't understand. They don't purr. They don't react the way that cats do. They don't want things the same way that cats do, and so I don't know how to read them very well. And I look at cats and I can understand that the cat likes the life of comfort and shows up and is cute and is,
Cries like a baby.
cries like a baby. She makes baby sounds, which immediately trigger this feeling of, okay, I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to nurture
Mhm.
you in a way that I feel like the dog is more of a tool that hangs out. It's something that is expanding the human's ability to do stuff, while I feel like the cat
They
is more
respond
demanding.
so well to vocalizations, right? That's the one thing about dogs that's so different from cats. Is like you can like the dog understands what you're saying in tone at least. And actually, I think there's some evidence they understand words really well too, right?
I think that there's evidence that cats do as well, but they ignore you.
They ignore you, yeah. The dogs are
I
just
checked
so they're easily integrated into like our verbal. Because when you agree that like the fundamental weird thing about humans is language, like it seems like all of the ability to even think comes down to being able to organize your thoughts using language and so forth. And it's like if dogs somehow have like, do they have language? Do you know if the wild wolves have anything resembling language?
Body language for sure. And then there's howling. And I know kind of like what you were saying before with the guy in Alaska, like you can, from what I've heard and read, like you can tell wolves have different cultures essentially. Like it's a different, like chimpanzees have different cultures. Some don't use tools like others do. Wolves do as well. Dogs do by extent. So
What kind
it's,
of tools?
or with chimpanzees, they use like sticks to fish termites. Some use rocks to like smash something. Others use like leaves to scoop water and things. But that's
Dogs?
not dogs. I don't think use stone tools that, to my knowledge, but
Thank God.
ca- yeah, caching bones, like stashing a bone away for the winter. That's a tool. You're using the ground for its like storage purposes. Um, Dogs can open doorknobs. You can teach them to do all sorts of things, but it's not like burying a bone is. I've seen my dog do that without learning that from another dog. So that's an instinct for sure. But other things, like opening a door, stepping on those little talk buttons is something that's taught. It's not an instinct. But
But it still seems
yeah,
to imply that they have the capacity, like they have the neural structures or whatever you want to call it. They have that some capacity to think in that way, right? Like the language, the capabilities to at least understand language seem to be there, which is very bizarre. I think like that can't just be an accident, right? I can't imagine that something would evolve the ability to process language, even though it has to be taught, of course, by a human later. It still has that ability, right? And I don't think a lot of other animals possess that same ability.
What are you trying to tie it to? Are you just observing that it's perplexing that dogs appear to be so wired to participate in human culture because of their ability to understand?
Yeah, I'm just trying to like really dial in the overlap between humans and dogs that led their evolutionary paths to be so intertwined in the last 10, 20,000 years.
When do we think that humans evolved language?
That's hard to say.
yeah.
How do we
The
just Google this? Okay, almost. They think that 200,000 years ago. So language was well around by the time that we had.
How
dogs.
in the world would they know that?
That's a great
you can tell. I know physically Neanderthals have a hyoid bone, which allows for our tongues to do the not manipulative. What am I looking for? Not gymnastic.
Articulation or something?
There you go. Yeah, the way they move, articulation or something. That happened, but stone tools are definitely 2, maybe 3 million years old, and making them and teaching people how to make them and learning how to make them, you need language for that. I don't think there's a way you can do it without. Maybe you can do it by grunting, but it would be like explaining how to use a power drill to drill holes through. So like it's just, you can't do that through grunting. I can't really explain it, but so there would have been something, but maybe it was just pointing or just watching someone do it. But
I think
Yeah,
watching is really powerful.
I've heard that navigation's a good one too for like why you would need language in terms of like planning a trip somewhere and actually like especially going on the seas, and people seem to have been on the seas since almost the beginning. And it seems like to organize a trip and pack all the right stuff and like not kill yourself basically and get where you're going, you would need some sort of way of expressing ideas in a tangible fashion.
I'll buy navigation because navigation's abstract, right? So if you're the drill example to me feels like something that you could actually learn really easily without anybody ever saying anything.
You might put a few holes in your hand or something.
You might, but honestly, probably not, because you have some sense of self-preservation. But navigation is really abstract because somebody has to be like, okay, we want to go to this place. And in order to do that, it's a place that you have to think of in your mind.
Yeah.
And you have to look at the stars and you have to look at the sun and you have to pack all these things because it's going to take us this amount of time. It requires an abstraction that just watching somebody flint knap a rock seems like it wouldn't be that difficult. Because if your idea is that we were learning how to hunt from watching wolves, then that would suggest that probably doesn't need that much language. You just sit and you watch. Like I can watch my cat hunt in the backyard. She builds herself a blind, she lies down, she sits in a place for a really long time. And so it's a thing that I can see her do without having to have the language to describe it because the results are there. She comes up with
I think it's all in the complexity, right? It's like how I've never built a stone tool. I know you have. I assume it's a lot harder than it looks, you know? I actually have no idea. Right? So, like, we don't really know what sort of skills are tied up in doing that. I mean, of course, you're just bashing this rock over and over, but in terms of actually getting the design right, I think the design part is really where you start to get into abstractions because you have to be able to fix this thing to a pole eventually, right? Or to an arrow, a shaft of an arrow at some point. And it's like, and then you got to make sure the arrow flies through the air straight. And then it's like, at some point, you're kind of getting into this pretty abstract land very quickly. Where it's like you want that arrow to go to the same place every time, and that's a whole new ball game as far as I can tell.
Yeah, early stone tools where it's just like Oldowan technologies where you just crack a rock in half and get the sharp edge. That you don't need language for, I'd imagine. But once you get to Homo erectus, which is about 2 to 1 million years ago, and 1 million years ago is where we start using fire. The way they made their stone tools, it's called bifacial reduction. It's a lot more difficult to teach, and it requires more precision and skill. So they probably would have had to have something, but I could still imagine that being something you could just do by watching. But me as a modern human for 8 years trying to do it by watching still can't do it perfectly. So, but I don't need to do it every day to survive. So it might be, yeah, but I would agree. You can probably, it's a good point. Like you could, with the power drill example, you could just watch someone do that probably. Yeah.
The fire moment is really, really fascinating to me too. Like how that would have changed the organization of things wildly. And I wonder what kind of abstraction would be necessary to tame fire.
Well, birds can do it. There's been evidence of birds in, I think in the Australian bush where they take sticks that have been lit on fire by lightning strikes and then they carry them to areas where there's grass and they use the fire to drive the rodents and small creatures out of the tall grass they can get at them.
Birds scare me in those reasons. Like they're really good at that kind of stuff. It's surprising, but I actually had this conversation with Donnie the other day when I had him on my podcast. I asked him, where do you think fire comes from? And well, at first the question came up because I asked him when he's doing survival classes or when he's out there surviving in the Amazon or whatnot, he is a shelter first, fire second person. And he's like, you need to make a shelter because you have to. Fire you can make later once you find water, but fire makes you sedentary. You have to stay with it. And I thought that was neat. But then other people make a fire first and then go shelter. But I asked him, where do you think that comes from? And he said, just watching lightning hit something, or maybe I said that. I don't remember exactly how he put it, but we came to the conclusion that, his answer was you probably saw fire eviscerate like a specific area and you saw it burnt carcasses and it smells good, like the food tastes better. And you want to replicate that. So you try it again, either using friction fire or something like that. But then I was thinking, same with lightning. They either saw lightning do that and then the consequential fire, and they were like, oh, whoa. And then 17 generations, they forgot about that. And it finally started picking up. but there might have been some Homo erectus that were like, okay, there's a storm, there's going to be lightning, let's follow it, and then pass that on with language and culture, and then learned how to harness it.
I always imagined there was like many years where people would try to keep they would chase the fire, get it from a storm, and then try to keep it alive. And there would be like some sort of primitive like kernel of a religion almost, right? Or some sort of like, this might even like nucleate culture as a whole, because whoever was able to keep that fire going was essentially, this would be maybe in my imagination at least, before they were able to actually create fire. And that could have gone on for many thousands of years, where people were just keeping fire.
That's something that I can't ever probably think of a way to get evidence for, but I would argue is 100% true. Like there's just no way that didn't happen. Yeah. Like trying to keep it alive once you had it. And that's a big Indigenous American thing. There's the eternal fire in Cherokee society that never goes out in the middle of the village, and everyone has to tend to it. I think it's common in a lot of tribes.
And just like the bonfire, right? Just like getting together with your friends, or even our fascination with like the flicker of the TV screen or something. Like we're inherently drawn to telling stories around flickering lights like that. Like there's something organizing about a fire, especially at night, and it just seems like there's something very deep in the brain that responds to that, especially in terms of organizing culture around it or society.
Yeah, food for sure. Food brings you together. It's communal. But then, now that you say that, think about it, like fire is protection, fire is warmth, fire is home. So you feel safe enough to have those vulnerable conversations, or even if not vulnerable conversations about yourself, just you feel safe and secure enough to have time to tell a story and things like that. But fire is definitely fundamental to the human experience. And once fire is found archaeologically, it's when our skulls drastically get smaller, our teeth get way smaller, because now you have a second stomach to digest your food before your stomach has to do all the work. So you get
is that why you think the skulls got smaller, because they didn't need to be as muscular?
Some of it's probably sexual selection, but I would argue it's food. You don't need giant gorilla-sized like teeth for mastication if food is much softer, and you're getting more nutrients out of it and more calories out of it, because you're not wasting your calories with your stomach digesting raw meat the whole time, and you get more out of it.
It's interesting, yeah, because if you look at chimps or something, they have these huge bellies. Like they must have these enormous guts, because they're like eating like fruit all day long for the most part. I know they sometimes eat meat, but it just must really be a drag to have to sit around digesting belly full of fruit day in and day out.
Like gorillas sleep all the time. Yeah.
That makes sense.
And they're huge, and all they eat is plants. Yeah.
Hey everybody, are you listening to this thinking, how can I make this podcast reach even more people and become more powerful and explore all of my favorite topics? Well, there's a solution to that. And you could come over to join us at Discord and tell us your ideas. You can come over to Facebook, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. And if you've already done all those things, consider joining the Insider community at patreon.com. Because for just a couple dollars a month, you can not only support this project and help it grow and become more strong and more robust and guarantee the future lifetime of this project, but you can also get in on our weekly discussions. We meet up every Sunday and hash it out about what's cool in the universe of science and ideas. And we consider ways to make the project better. And we want to have you at that discussion table. So come on over.
I was looking at the age of when we think that people started to develop fire. And so there's evidence for fire 400,000 years ago, which is kind of in line with, I don't know if you saw, there was a Nature paper about evidence of carved wooden beams from 475,000 years ago.
Vaguely recall that. I didn't read it though.
It came out just a couple of weeks ago, maybe even less than a week ago. But basically they found structural support beams at a Neanderthal settlement that they dated to 475,000 years ago. And so it strikes me that our picture of how these things emerged and how long they've been around and what defines human versus not human is going to change drastically
Yeah.
as we start to discover more things, because there's a great filter from the past to the present where we lose track of the evidence that would give us a complete picture of who these people were, what they were behaving like. But it seems like you say shelter is important, fire is important. And once you have these two things in place, you have the ability to then start to structure other things. And I feel like the people who are making the tools and the people who are domesticating the dogs are probably doing it in a relatively organized fashion, because Shiloh is saying that, okay, you need to have tools that are precise.
Sophisticated,
but also precise, right? Like your spear has to be the same from time to time to time, so that when you throw it, you know it's going to behave exactly the same way. And that strikes me as somebody who's doing it all the time, that has a technique that they've worked out. And it might be that there's just,
and passed on generationally, right?
Yeah, like the idea that there's a lineage of the blacksmith in the village. There's probably a lineage of the people that knap the flint in the village as well.
Absolutely. I don't doubt, and there's tons of gender studies on, whether women and men, or like who was doing it all the time, but everybody, I think, had to flint knap the basics. Like you would have to, because it makes fire. It's a cutting implement. If you get lost, you need to do it. Like everyone knew the basics of it. But having gone to a bunch of knap-ins, which are like meetups where a bunch of rural southern dudes come together to make arrowheads together, like just sitting and watching them effortlessly do it, with like talking to each other, not looking at their hands, just like kind of doing it and making a beautiful like piece of art, essentially. There was probably people in the village who like specialized, kind of like you're saying, in the precise manufacture of them, but everybody probably was able to make a basic shape, like sharp edge tool. Because there's tons of evidence that women were hide scraping and doing a lot of like I'd say the domestic activities, but like a lot of stuff that happens at camp involves stone tools much more than projectile points are needed and stuff. And that was probably all women, maybe children too, from the studies on it, but there's no way to tell.
That's really interesting. Yeah, you can imagine. It's really interesting because, like, as civilization emerges, many, very recently, let's say 10,000 years ago or something, at least as far as we can tell, there must have been some force of these people who are really good at these techniques, who are able to provide their services to multiple different groups too. Like you can imagine a merchant class emerging of people who could actually, trade their fine craftsmanship.
Are you suggesting that the emergence of civilization was due to the emergence of the first military-industrial complex?
Well, like he was saying, the domestic tools, kitchenware too. I mean, that's hugely valuable, right? If you can trade...
So it's Cutco knives and the military-industrial complex. You know what Cutco knives are?
Yes. I had a friend who tried that out in high school.
I think we have one.
Everybody does in some drawer somewhere. I mean, I think that that's really astute. I think that that's a good point, because you have civilization has to be the product of incremental technological development that is able to be summed together into some next step.
In specialization, right? The specialization of roles, like the dogs have roles even, but humans have like really sophisticated roles to the point that like I don't even grow my own food, basically, right? Like that's really wild if you think about it in the natural landscape. When does that ever happen? But I mean, it's even worse than that. I mean, most people probably can't even, like take care. They hire people to take care of their house. They hire people to take care of their car. They hire people, like it's so specialized in our society today. And there must have been germs of that very early on with their early tool making as well.
For sure. And it's funny looking back too, like when archaeology students or kids doing anthropology, they usually have to take a lithics class, or you learn about lithics in your intro to archaeology class. There's always a day where you either watch somebody flint knap or you flint knap with people. And watching modern humans in 2021, I guess it was 2018 when I saw that, hold a rock and then another rock and not know what to do is so funny, because we're sitting here on a podcast and I'm talking to you in California, with lights all around, and like it's just a 3 million-year-old thing is just gone out of
Dude,
our
that
head.
freaks me out
Yeah.
really bad sometimes like
Yeah.
when I'm just sitting around thinking about how bad I mean, look, I like getting out in the back country and stuff, and like
Sure.
I think I could do all right, but I don't know, man. Like I there's so much I don't know how to do. It just kind of freaks me out. Just basic stuff like how to get, food and water. Like if the grocery store is closed, or it's not something that, and not even just for myself, but everyone I know, right, for the most part, is in the same boat. People in the city are probably even worse off. We're out, at least out in the country and so forth. So we to get out in the woods a fair amount. But most people live in the cities. How many of them even know how to start a fire, right? Or,
Right.
But I think that we did this on purpose.
Oh yeah.
Right? I really feel like there was a very intentional push towards making sure that we didn't have to spend all of our time doing this kind of stuff.
Like, what is that thing Puru says?
My brother-in-law is always saying that he doesn't want to go camping or backpacking because he's like, my people invented civilization so we didn't have to sleep outside on the ground. And I'm like, dude, you're right. We did, because it was uncomfortable, and you were cold all the time, or you were hot all the time, and you were hungry all the time, and the food that you had was gross. It was bland, and it was the same every single day. We go out into the woods here, and I'm like, okay, so you have deer, acorns, and
not that many deer.
Well, there were more deer at the time, but and then maybe you have like root bulbs from this lily called the camas lily. No spices, no butter, no intricate methods of preparation, and I think that it just gets boring, and humans really love novelty, and we're always driven towards something else, and so we've created this machine for ourselves that allows us to have all of the things all at once, so that you don't have to eat the same meal for 30 years of your life.
Your teeth were healthier, but yeah, it would have been the same thing. But yeah, I mean, there's some variation in the diets depending on where you are, but especially in the Levant, or I guess, or the Fertile Crescent, where people first started settling down. But back to the specialization thing, it's like once the technology of agriculture spreads, and this really coincides with the ending of the Ice Age, or you're like, whoa, there's all sorts of new plants sprouting. Like, let's figure this out. Everything changes, like fundamentally changes, because now, yeah, you have people, instead of everybody having to hunt and gather all day, and it's mostly gather all around the world except for higher latitudes, you're now having time to one person makes shoes, one person weaves like clothes, one person makes blankets, maybe, but definitely somebody is making tools, somebody is cooking, somebody is hunting, and that just up until today just keeps specializing and specializing. And I think people specifically bred dogs for sure, depending on where, but that's just, I mean, and it also not dogs, but just the diversity and division of labor after the agricultural revolution creates inequality, creates monarchy, creates, because it's like, Oppenheimer, like it creates a bunch of stuff that's very bad, but also there's, not to say what Oppenheimer did was good, but just like, I guess, do you see what I'm getting at? Like, there's tons of good, there's tons of bad from settling down and making agriculture. But I think fundamentally it was,
I think
to
about
worry
it
about
mostly as good, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, even if you look at Oppenheimer, right? It's like the amount of lives that were actually saved by this horrific bomb in World War II are quite incontrovertible. I mean, the Japanese, like, were definitely not going to surrender. They would have, like, lost every last person if there would have been a land attack, essentially. So,
and in addition, the emergence of agriculture creates a condition where most parents don't lose children, but it used to be that you would lose upwards of 50 or 60% of the children that were born to you. And that was just a thing that people dealt with, right? Like, you had a baby that would get diphtheria and it would choke to death on its own.
I looked this up the other day. It was like 40% mortality rate before 1800. But I don't know, back further, it was probably much worse even.
Yeah, I was looking at the other. I think I was looking at it for something. It was like 60% that were earlier before the 1800s, because that was when they were starting to develop this idea of
Mhm.
epidemiological cleanliness. Like Middle Ages, it's like you get an infection, you're just fucked, like completely.
Yeah. If you got a cut, you're like, uh-oh.
Like that's the end, right? Because
Let alone a freaking broken leg or something. Like, can you imagine?
I broke my leg a couple years ago. We were at the climbing gym, and I fell in this weird way. Total freak accident. I just snapped. You know the inside of
and
your
you
ankle
fell
bone?
like 6 inches.
I
Too,
felt it was absolute freak accident. But so I snapped the bottom of that ankle bone that's on the inside, the little nub that you can feel on the inside of your ankle. I just snapped that off, basically.
The end of your tibia?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I don't remember the name of it, but I went to the doctor, and the doctor was like, "Yeah, it's loose. There's fragments. If you walk on it and you don't get surgery, it'll heal in a way that's messed up, and you probably won't be able to walk properly anymore." And I was just thinking about that in the year 100.
1970.
Yeah, and then you'd be totally lost to the world, and you would be somebody that was forever crippled.
And like forever indebted to the people around. I mean, you'd have to have a strong society to survive.
I think your society would at some point look at you and be like, sorry.
Unless you could tell really good stories, right? Or make really good
Right.
flint tools or something like that.
There's the Neanderthal at Shenandoah Cave. He's got, there's a he or she, I think it's a he, a bashed eye, like his eye orbit is messed up, so he was probably blind in that eye, missing half of an arm, and I believe he's not missing a leg, but he wasn't walking correctly. And he lived to middle age, I think, which means he was being cared for. People fed him, carried him, whatever they had to do. And I don't remember the age of that, but it was more than 40,000 years ago. That's when Neanderthals go away. But that was in Iraq. So there was that. There was compassion. There's people caring for the, the infirm, I guess is what we would use there.
I would point out here that this is an exception, right?
Maybe not though. I mean, like,
wouldn't you expect?
I don't know. I just think like if you look at like the inception of religion on Earth, it's like it all starts off with ancestor worship, and I have a sense that like our ancestors really had reverence for old people. Like I think that they really put those people in an elevated place in society in a way that we can't possibly comprehend today.
Like 45-year-olds. Like,
people were probably gray and hunched over at 45 back then. But yeah, the elders, the ancestors, I mean, they formed the basis for all early religions, along with the shamanic tradition. You start to see that, like the tomb, the family tomb, and the family tomb being the marker of the land that you're entitled to, essentially. And people will service these tombs generation after generation. This is before we think of modern civilization even appearing.
Even modern civilization. I was reading about Gregor Mendel the other day, and he was born in a house that his family had lived in for 130 years.
That's wild.
It's crazy.
And a lot of these, they also, after the tomb thing, they started just burying people underneath the floor of their houses too. That was very common from what I understand. And I don't think
the
that's...
Natufians did that. Yeah.
Who did?
The Natufians. Some early, it's the Epipaleolithic, so essentially like basically the Paleolithic right to the Neolithic transition, like that couple thousand years. They lived in what's now like the Sea of Galilee area. The woman with the puppy buried under her is that, but they buried their ancestors like heads under the floor. So to my understanding, it and other cultures did it too. The mortality rate of children is so high back, in the Paleolithic for sure, that the life expectancy is like 30 or something like that. But people lived into their 50s and 60s and more. It's just that mortality rate or infant mortality rate really drives those numbers down. But to your point,
and even then, if there's only a couple of old people, right, then it's like almost like they're even more special, right? Because they've seen so much more than everybody else. And so if like being old is relatively rare, you can imagine that becoming like an almost supernatural like experience to deal with somebody who's seen multiple generations or something like that.
Right. And then their ability to store all that cultural knowledge and pass it down. And that's still a very tribal thing today. Yeah.
Do we have a sense of how old people tended to be when we find their skeletons? Like, what's the range of ages?
I actually do not know off the top of my head, so I would just be talking out of my ass. But I think there are a lot of middle-aged people found. Like I see that word used a lot in archaeological reports. So at least to their 40s, which I guess is middle age, 50s, middle age, maybe. I don't know. I'm 31, so I'm getting there. I just gotta think about it. Yeah, I would have
That
to
makes
look that
sense.
up.
That's kind of like when your like
Let me see
natural
if I can
strength
figure
kind
it
of
out.
starts to taper off, at least for
Yeah.
men. Yeah, women like lose their fertility after 40-ish or something. So
Yeah. Your knees crack when you wake up every day. Yeah.
tell me about it.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, you're right on the money there. Like elderly people were rare, or not elderly, just older people. So it was their ability to know stuff. And like, if you're a kid growing up in, let's say, Paleolithic Czechoslovakia, you might only see 50 new people in your lifetime. Like if you're not moving around a lot, or you are moving around a lot. So somebody who's old can tell you stories of like, oh, where we met these people who did this, they had these type of dogs, they made their tools this way, and it's probably a fascinating thing to hear.
Mm.
Um, and that's just how knowledge and technology spreads. I would argue. Yeah.
The earliest internet imaginable.
right. Yeah. Full of ads and pop-ups. But I don't even know how to make that a joke, but yeah, I said it. Yeah, I don't know. I can't make that a joke, and I forgot where we were going with that. But yeah.
We'll chew on that. We'll get back. We will make it a joke by the end of the podcast.
There you go.
But
I'm surprised by how difficult it is to figure out exactly how old the Neanderthals and the Denisovans were
Mm-hmm.
in their lifespan. It looks like it's maybe about 40, but that's an average. And so I don't know how they're calculating that. And it's not a superficially easy thing to determine. But I'm like, okay, what changes the maximum lifespan of a human? Is it just modern medicine and sanitation? Is it diet? Because you'd think that they would have a good diet if they're hunter-gatherers. They have lots of organ meats, they have lots of meat, they're getting a lot of exercise, they're outside all the time. If we believe in the mythology of paleo diets and ketogenic diets and repeat and everything else, they're basically living the absolute dream. Why would they be dying so young?
There's a lot of frostbite in Europe for sure. There's a lot of the hand stencils are missing fingers. They're assuming that's frostbite, or there's tribal peoples today that will cut off a finger when someone dies for like mourning. But there's any way you can interpret how they're missing fingers, but it's Ice Age Europe, probably frostbite. Things like that. Breaking your ankle, you get sepsis the next day. Like, sure, there's some medicinal plants you could use, but I'd say for the most part, if your femur snapped in half, you might be lights out. Things like that. So I'd imagine that
I might be lights out if my femur snaps in half. I don't know if I'm gonna make it to the hospital. Even it sounds horrible.
Sounds terrible. Yeah. But I do know.
So like accidents and trauma probably did account for a lot of death.
For sure.
Infection.
And we learned in Paleoanth too that Neanderthals, I forget how they expressed it, but like essentially their skeletons often look like rodeo clowns because of genuinely how risky whatever they were, whether it was interpersonal roughhousing, interpersonal violence, or it's just they didn't have projectile weapons, they just had thrusting spears. So possibly we're just going up to woolly rhinos trying to stab it, and it just destroyed them. And then that technology obviously got replaced by humans coming through with more, atlatls and bows and things later. But yeah, just a lot of injuries and falling. That would be my conjecture.
That makes sense. Yeah, I read that. I saw this report a while back that they had found essentially these runways that people had made with these like pits where they were driving some sort of, I don't know if it was like woolly mammoths or something, but they were chasing these beasts into this pit to kill them and just slaughtering like a whole, season's worth of animals all at once. But it seemed like extremely dangerous business. I actually know for a fact that being a ranch hand is one of the more dangerous professions out there. You
I've
get
seen a lot of
kicked,
people missing thumbs. Yeah.
yeah, or you
Yeah.
get kicked in the face, or fall underneath the cattle or anything. It can be, even those aren't even predatory animals, I guess is what I'm trying to say, that
Mhm.
working with animals is unpredictable.
I think Spain or France, there's tons of cliffs where there's, Cima de los Huesos, I think is the site where there's just hundreds of horses butchered that they drove over a cliff. Which is interesting to me too, because there's that whole notion that like, they used every bit of the animal. It's like, no, Native Americans also like drove hundreds of bison over a cliff. There's no way you're eating every single piece of it,
Yeah, I wonder that. Like, what do they do how do they even make use of all that meat? Like, they didn't really have preservatives, right? I guess they could smoke the meat to some extent.
Smoke it. If it's cold, you can like bury it for like a freezer type thing. But yeah, mostly you're probably taking the pelts, you're taking the prime cuts of meat. And the other possible scenario too is that like once that happens, it's a big group aggregation where it's like, hey, it's that time of year, and like that's when you come and meet and you trade sons and daughters, trade technologies and stuff, because
Mm,
that's something people don't think about all the time too, especially with people colonizing the Americas. It's like, or the initial Paleo-Indian migrations, you have to have at least 50 people to not inbreed.
hmm.
And there's like this whole like, how do you how do you get from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego in a couple hundred years? And there had to be massive amounts of people coming for that genetic exchange. Like
Mm.
it's pretty crazy. So people were interacting a lot. It's just how many people you saw might have been small.
Did you watch that Netflix show about the chimps, the Chimp Empire or Chimp Nation or something like that? Did you
No, but
ever
I
see
heard
that?
about it.
It's kind of interesting, but the way that I guess the chimps do it is they send the young women off to another tribe basically at some point. So the men stay in place,
I believe
and
they're called females.
oh, sorry, they're called females, they're not women. I'm sorry. Sorry, ladies.
Fair enough.
I
Yeah,
didn't mean anything by it.
you're good. There's it's called bride trading in like older anthropology textbooks. I don't know if that's the current term that I would use or if it's the right word to use, but I imagine you're also trading sons too, or I guess groom trading. But it does seem for like land tenure, like that seemed to be the case, and I didn't realize chimps did that too. Um,
Man,
but
it's a fascinating little. I would like to see more of those shows where they look at like wolves. I would love to see one about wolves. I know there's one about meerkats that's kind of interesting. Uh, from like
it's called
the animal.
Chimp Nation, I think, right? Or
I
Chimp.
think so. Or
It's Chimp
is
Empire.
it Chimp Empire?
Chimp
Chimp
Empire.
Empire or Chimp something.
And there's
Anyways,
also Meerkat Manor that we
Meerkat
watched
Manor, yeah.
afterwards. That was
Oh,
very
That's
good.
like a precursor. But they follow these animals around, and they basically show how they do have these complex social networks. And actually, the way that the chimps interact with meat is really interesting too, because they don't survive on the meat necessarily. Like they eat fruit mostly, but there's something very like socially organizing about the hunt and the
They hate those
distribution.
monkeys.
They
Yeah.
hate them, yeah. They do. And they just they get really fired up, and all of them kind of know what to do, and they just go on this rampage and catch one all of a sudden for like no reason, because they're there all the time. The monkeys are just climbing around in the
Yeah.
trees, and they just go wild and catch the monkey, and then whoever catches the monkey gets to basically distribute the meat out to different people in uh the chimp tribe, whatever it's called. What are they, a pack or something? I don't know. The
It's called a troop or a
troop.
family.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's like this very significant distribution of that meat too, and I think that helps reinforce the dominance or competence hierarchy of the chimps within that tribe, because that person has this power to really say who's who in the tribe and who gets the best pieces and so forth. And so it's almost
Mhm.
like their hunting isn't even, it's more social than it is survival. It's very fascinating.
Yeah, that's an astute point too. it is interesting how they just. I don't think I didn't see Chimp Empire, but I know that it's several chimp documentaries I've seen. Like they just all of a sudden, just one day, go on a rampage and go attack another group for like
That too.
seemingly no reason. Yeah, which is oddly human. But then it, that there's a lot of pushback against like using chimps as an example of human behavior because we are so far removed from them with the common ancestor. But I do look at chimps like, one, there's a person in there to me, and then two, if not human, it is certainly what like ancient hominins like behavior would have looked like. So it's close to us for sure.
It's hard to like not see the chimp in people after you watch one of these documentaries. Like you can see it
Right.
yourself, you're like, you kind of like some of your instincts are very chimp-like. I mean, the territorialism and like, I think some of our lesser angels are very chimp-like in that sense, like our envy and this like greed and things like this are like, you see that in the chimps. You see all of these. And
Well, there's the experiments where they'll give one monkey or one chimp a treat, and the other one will get a smaller treat, and they get really upset because they think that it isn't fair. And so these really old ideas about what it means to do the right thing, and what it means for an action to be just, and what it means to share equally are very, very old, and they predate humans. And I know that there's a tendency in the literature and in biology in general, probably anthropology as well, to not want to compare between humans and animals because
Very
we're
much
so far separated. And it's
Yeah.
really strange to me because I can't trace back where exactly that emerged,
yeah, what's up with that?
but I think that it's a mistake. I think that it's a terrible mistake.
What's
I
the fear?
sorry, yeah, I see a lot of pushback with it, especially when it comes to evolutionary psychology. I can understand why a lot of the things might come off as very sexist, and see that, but I imagine it's for those kind of reasons too, like comparing animal behavior to human, or human behavior to animal behavior can be either misogynistic or like in many ways it could be racist. In many ways it could be just misconstrued and used to prove several points, but it's science to me. So at a certain point, like it should be just fine to talk about and just entertain an idea. But
There must have been a few jerks at some point that just were absolute sexist, racists, or whatever, and you leaned on these arguments.
I think that the arc that I understand is that humans are the chosen animals of God, and all of nature is ours for the consumption and for the taking. And if you look into nature, you see that there are some animals whose burden it is to be devoured and manipulated by other animals. And then you start to get the translation of it onto races and cultures as opposed to interspecies competition. And then all of a sudden you have social Darwinism. And once you have social Darwinism and population statistics, you have all of these people advocating for eugenics. And then you're in a pretty bad place. I found out the other day that the guy who invented population statistics and statistical tests and statistical analysis was actually one of the first most vocal proponents of eugenics in America.
This is Pearson?
Pearson,
Oh.
yeah. And so I think that that's where that's probably why people became allergic to it, because they're like, whoa, hold on a second. Like, we make these ideas the universal way that we look at biology, and then these guys show up and this is where they take these ideas. This is too horrifying to consider. We must eradicate our perception that humans are just another animal because that gives us too much of an excuse for our bad behavior.
No, I would agree with that. Early anthropology in the Americas, in the United States for sure, had that racial aspect to it. Carlton Coon was a big guy. I think he might have been British, but either way, it was all interconnected. A lot of stuff trying to compare the races, and that gets into phrenology and things like that. And Franz Boas was the father of American anthropology, and he was a German physicist, German Jewish physicist from, forget where he lived. I don't think it was Berlin. Anyway, came here, and it was about before World War II, but a lot of anthropologists were out there with calipers looking at people's head sizes and things like that, and he was like, that's not gonna lead anywhere good. And it clearly didn't. So a lot of anthropology shifted from that to the modern kind of what we have now, where it's like, yes, you can tell races from vaguely, you can tell races from skeletons vaguely, but like that shouldn't be the forefront of it. There's other things there, and that definitely changed. So I can see where in anthropology, for sure, for good reasons, things shift away from that, and people kind of try to not talk about it. But like statistically,
there's like no way to have that conversation objectively, I think, is what it comes down to. Like, you can't, like, everybody has some racial feature or whatever, right? So it's very hard for you to like be unbiased about it. It's not like you can just like sit back and talk about dog breeds or something and it's totally fine because you like don't have any skin in the game. But I think when people start making these claims, it just becomes impossible to do objective science about it.
Yeah.
And it's like some stones are best left unturned too, It's like we live in a multiracial world, so like we best learn to live harmoniously in that world, regardless of, whatever's under that stone.
Sure. And the best way it was put to me by a forensic anthropologist was like, for police, they can say, yes, it was, the skeleton seems to be a Caucasian woman, but it's not 100% accurate. If you find somebody who is half indigenous Mexican, half European Mexican, like you're half Iberian, are they Native American skeletons or are they Caucasian skeletons? Or if someone's Asian American with a white father or something like that, you can't tell. So it's just not worth like putting that time into. And that made a lot of sense to me because people are so varied. It's just not worth making that your dissertation, to me. I don't know.
Well, it's interesting that isn't the case also through the fossil record, right? Because if we have a lot of exchange between cultures in the ancient world, you would expect that same sort of smearing of characteristic that makes it almost impossible to tell apart the different types of skeletons. But it seems like it's possible to look back and say, these were Neanderthals, these were Cro-Magnon, these were Denisovan, these were the first Homo sapiens. And so that implies
even though they were interbreeding.
Even though that they were interbreeding, but maybe the interbreeding is classified as a new species, right? So, like, is there a sense that Cro-Magnon is the product of, like, Neanderthal and human? Or some other undiscovered type that is, or some other classified type that I don't know of that is.
I think the interbreeding is, like,
listed?
kind of controversial, too. It's, like, because how do you separate that from common ancestor and so forth, too?
Right.
But I think the popular consensus is that Neanderthals are interbreeding with humans, last I checked.
Yeah. Cro-Magnon, I forget, like they don't use that term anymore. I think
that disappeared.
It more refers to just, so there's anatomically modern Homo sapiens and then there's behaviorally modern Homo sapiens. And that divide to me is Homo sapiens versus Homo sapiens sapiens. We are Homo sapiens sapiens, which is a subspecies of that. I would lump Neanderthals and Denisovans into Homo sapiens Neanderthalensis, whereas most people might say, not most people, it's kind of changed, would say Homo Neanderthalensis, making it its own species. Because, one, I try to use this analogy a lot. If you were an archaeologist, 1,000 years ago, whatever the scenario you gave me before, if you dig up Shaquille O'Neal, but then you dig up Danny DeVito, and they're both adult American people in the same continent, you would look at that and think it's a completely different species until you could do
100%.
genetic testing on it. And that's without looking at the skin color. It's without looking at where their heritage comes from. It's just finding them next to each other. Danny DeVito looks like, and I assume his skeleton looks like an orangutan. It's probably, but like, it's just like, there's that. And then we're digging up all of these things and there's so much drama in paleoanth of people wanting, like, I found the oldest kind of thing like that. And I wish that weren't the case, but it's just clearly the case. And it has been for hundreds of years. It's a rough field. There's a lot of drama, but
people just claiming credit for finding stuff and arguing about whether or not the conclusions are correct.
Yeah, because if it says like oldest Homo sapiens found in North Africa pushes back understanding of science is a great article that gets clickbaits. Where really it's just a Homo sapien that, like any other one you found, that just has a weird tumor, or like, its arms are a little longer than the other one. That's where I find it. I could be wrong in that, but the way I understand it is Homo erectus is the first to be Homo, and then it's first to use fire, first to use bifacial tools, first to leave Africa, and not the first to walk upright, but it's the first what we would look at as a human leaving Africa kind of thing. And that's what regionally evolves into Neanderthals, what regionally evolves into Denisovans, and then us. So while those were going on in Europe and Asia, there's more genetic admixture between two people in Africa than there is between me and someone in Beijing. Like, it's just such a melting pot of genetics that modern Homo sapiens evolve there, leave Africa, get to Europe and Asia, and replace those populations. So what I'm getting at is, I think any modern human after Homo erectus is just like a mutant version of that. Like, it's an amalgamation of different genetic and regional variations that have now just merged into one, because they can all interbreed.
What happened with them replacing all of the other upright chimpy things, whatever, pre-proto-human? What happened, do you think? Like, did they...
Oh, like with Naledi and stuff like that, or...
Yeah, just like the displacement, yeah. Who were the other upright hominids that were... You said as the Homo sapiens moved out of Africa that they displaced the other upright chimp things.
And so was the world filled with upright chimps that weren't humans?
I guess I'm specifically speaking of like Europe and Asia filled with Neanderthals and Denisovans, or Homo erectus, because Homo erectus made it all the way to essentially Australia. And Zukoijian, China, I think, is the site it's where I get the million-year-old fire stat from. But is debated. There's also debate that it could be in Kenya too. But either way, how am I going to explain that? Like, it's just modern Homo sapiens love to have sex with each other, and like when you found Neanderthals, still do.
The whole industry built around that,
right?
Some of the most popular sites on the internet, from what I understand.
Right. OnlyFans will be bigger than Google if you give it another 10 years, guaranteed.
Homo sapiens, maybe. I have a lot of thoughts on that, but Homo sapiens like to bang each other, and I think as modern humans that all look...
But not just each other, right? Like, wasn't this just like a universal thing that they were just banging the Neanderthals?
Well, that's the debate, really. It's like
was this a sexual revolution?
I just think it's that we as modern people we see textbook stuff of like a Neanderthal, and it's classified and given this name that's so different. And I think with how evolution is taught in America, not that it's not taught, it's just that it's very complex to teach an 8th grader, like all of this stuff. So that's why it's kind of misconstrued a lot and hard for people to grasp. My point being, you look at Neanderthals as something completely different, and like they're always dressed in hides, or like they're bashing a rock together in a picture, but they really just looked like us, and it would have not been that much different. They could still talk, you could trade. Whether the sexual interactions were consensual or not, I don't know, but it definitely, there was intermingling, and there was communication and trade between them.
So was this like the first genocide on record, or was it like did Neanderthals suffer their own fate, or were they driven to extinction by competition, or by just like outright Holocaust level murder?
Yeah, I've heard that said too, and you can interpret it that way for sure. My personal opinion would be that it's not necessarily that Neanderthals went extinct. It's just that the human population with more sophisticated technology, more numbers, and an ability to live anywhere and adapt so quickly. It's just that we absorbed the Neanderthal population. Like, we fucked them to death. It'd be, to quote South Park. So it's just, and that's why everyone has 2% whatever DNA that's out of Africa. Like, it's just we're just part Neanderthal because it part of it, but they're also just a human at the same time, clearly, because we could have sex with them. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, the delineation between species has long been something that has.
It's probably like one of the dirtiest words in all of science, actually. I mean, I've got a few of them I could pull out, but like species is one of the worst. We were hanging out with this marine biologist, and he was talking about all these different species of rockfish.
And he's like, sometimes you find a half and half species of rockfish, and I was like, what do you mean half and half species? And he's like, well, it's half one species, half other species.
And we're like, wait, so they're breeding? And he's like, yeah. We're like, so what makes them a species then?
And he's like, wow. And it's just it's a term that has absolutely no foundation to it when you look deep enough into it. And it's a very frustrating thing because you want to believe that our ontological categories that we say this is this kind and this is this kind and this is this kind is effective and real. But we've sequenced the genomes of less than 1% of all of the organisms on Earth. I think that as we continue to do this, we're going to discover that a ton of our understandings of the differences between these creatures are just way off.
Yeah.
There's no way.
100% with you there. It's just, it's a term, like I need things expressed to me in categories. Like, I nerd out on knowing what, phylum or kingdom something is in, because it gives me a better sense of where to place things. And like the relationships too. What are we doing? How do we label this? It's just like, it's something I need. I don't know what that is. Maybe it's autism. I don't know, but like it
organizes the chaos into something manageable. I mean, it's totally I think science in particular, it's like without really robust, non-circular, ambiguous definitions of words, it's like, what the hell are we talking about? Like, we've tried to have some podcasts about consciousness research on this show, but the problem is everybody means something completely different by consciousness, and so the conversations are often just people talking right past each other. It's like, is there even a disagreement here, or do we just haven't defined our language specifically enough to really get past this?
That's a cool thought. Put a pin in that.
I mean, it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem in physics too. Like, there's so many words that are just ambiguous, and they don't mean the same thing between one person in a discipline and the guy in a lab on the other side of the ocean, or even upstate or whatever, where they don't mean the same thing. And there's so much confusion that results from that. And I think that it's like it's a very easy fix in a sense. It's like, developing new technology for improving science is hard and expensive, but like learning how to talk better seems like a really nice place to start. It's like,
yeah.
It's cheap.
Well, does it mean something to classify all of these different subtypes of early hominids as different species? What do we achieve by it? Just categorization so that they're easier to put handles on?
So there's a thing we learn in grad school called lumpers and splitters. And a lot of people like to lump species together. A lot of people like to split them. I forget where I fall. It's been a while on that, but I like to, I guess, lump them together. Like, I think humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans are all the same thing, just a little regionally different. But not to dunk on paleo ants, but I think it's cool to like find a new species and like make a paper about it, and it sells, and like go for it. And then like but that's the thing with paleo ants. 2 days later, something else gets dug up that upends the other thing that's said. And I think it's just safest to kind of assume we're all just very mutant Homo erectus, that after that it's anyone's ballgame. Like, it's just weird. And then there's the Naledi that just got found that lived alongside humans, that was upright and apparently making art in a cave. And
burial rituals too, right?
Yeah, which is that's very interesting.
That
And
cave.
then papers come out that are like, was it, yeah, Rising Star Cave, I think.
Mhm.
The papers come out and like the clickbait is always like upends archaeological thought, or archaeologists are wrong, or changes consensus. It's like, no, we're not wrong. The other stuff is still right. It's just another species of human we just didn't know existed. It's just gone now. And that, I find that weird with archaeology. In the past, it's been weaponized to be, a nationalistic thing, but now, like, especially with the pre-Clovis debates and all these things, like, people vilify archaeologists and paleoants because, like, we hold on to knowledge, or gatekeepers of the past and stuff. But I just noticed that a lot over the past few years. And where was I going with that? Oh, right, yeah. People will say like, wow, Neanderthals or Denisovans were so much more sophisticated than we thought. And like, I'll see that on like a Time or a CNN article. But like, archaeologists know that. Like, we know they were sophisticated. It's just the way it's taught. And like, understandably, you don't get that as like an 8th grader or somebody with passive knowledge of it. So I can see where that comes from. It's just such an interesting thing because we all like to know about our past. I don't know. And it's just a very divisive thing.
Yeah, we're trying to like, I think ultimately this is all oriented at trying to tell us about who we are and where we came from. Like, we're trying to put a story together about like what the hell is going on. Like, why are we the way we are? And
Yeah.
what are all of the decisions and bifurcations that led us to this point? And so I think that's why people get so touchy about it, is because it is like the story of you and me, and whoever has, purchase on that has a great deal of power in terms of telling us who we are, essentially.
Well, we're trying to understand human nature, right? Because if you can trace back this lineage through all of these thousands and thousands of years, then maybe you can say something about what it means to be human and what makes us so weird and different, and from our past be able to get some sense of where we should be going.
Mm-hmm. I don't disagree with that at all. I think it's right on the ball. Yeah, I mean, we're all just curious about that. I'd ask you guys. It's probably a complex question to ask right off the bat, but or on the spot. What's it mean to be human to you?
That's a good question.
I think of humans as time machines. This is kind of the way I've been thinking about it lately. Like, we seem to possess this really strange ability to go into the future and imagine all the different possible outcomes, and kind of try it out against our past in terms of which one of those outcomes we'd like to pursue. And so I think there's something very unique about the way that we're able to travel in time in our memories and project into the future. And there's something, I think that like the nature of thought and language is all centered around being able to organize those abstractions about the past and future in ways that will allow us to advance our cause.
Damn.
That's interesting.
I gotta
haven't-
process that for a second. Anyway, yeah, you go.
So like humans as time machine, I think is I've enjoyed watching you work.
This
that
is like
out.
this is my new thing. I'm just trying it on. I'm trying it on. Try it on with my students too.
I think that it's also the technological aspect of it, right? I watch there's a tree outside my window, and I watch the birds and the squirrels and the way that they eat and the way that they interact and the way that they live in nature. And they come equipped with all of their tools. The bird has the beak to get the acorn, to crack the acorn, to eat the acorn, and has remained in that form for forever because it is the tools that it has. But humans are the creatures that look at the bird and are like, I can make an ice pick. And then they go and they make
some wings.
Yeah, I can make some wings. The gap between the very first flight and the first bomber is like 40 years.
That's crazy.
But not to mention all the hundreds of poor chaps that jumped off of cliffs with wings strapped to their arms.
Oh, because they believed in it, right? And so there's this thing about the technology. We are the technological species. You look at other animals and they have these proto-technologies. You can look at ants and you're like, well, they farm aphids. Somebody keeps a specific type of mold because it prevents bacterial overgrowth. You have...
Crazy, yeah.
It's crazy and it's interesting. And you have termites that build skyscrapers that are relative to their body size, just off the charts complex
And the
versus the
crows are kind of
skyscrapers that
doing
we
really
build.
clever things too.
Yeah, like birds are worth
proto-tool
being
things.
terrified of, cephalopods, like they all do kind of cool stuff, but humans basically have the ability to just iterate until we are machines, and then we flow into the machine. Like we seem to be the species whose destiny it is to push evolution to the next like silicate phase.
We're like leaving the planet, for God's sake. It's like,
Yeah. Like we're not playing God, but we have the ability to think about evolution and where we're going, kind of thing. Is that what you guys are getting at?
I think that the thinking thing is really at the heart of that, and it's at the heart of innovation and technology. And I think that in order to think, you need language, at least in order to organize your thoughts. You might have some like thought like, oh, I should get out of the way because this bison's running headlong at me or something. But in order to actually organize that into some sort of like predictive fashion that you can manipulate and share with other people, you need language, and you need this sophisticated language that allows you to make abstract concepts.
I actually do think that humans in some way are gods. And I know that that sounds crazy and that's very gauche to say in the current climate of humans are bad. But I'm like, look, at some point, this ball of rock that we're on was an absolutely sterile surface, molten, raw, viscerally awful. Life got started. You can say it came from somewhere else. You can say it started here. But it has radiated outwards to create this massive diversity of species and kinds and forms. And everything that has ever happened on this planet will die if we don't leave. And we are the only species that are capable of preventing the absolute eradication of everything that is beautiful and holy that is here.
Are you saying like it's our responsibility to leave so everything else can continue living, or it's our responsibility to make sure everything continues living because it's going to die without us anyway?
It's going to die without
both,
us.
actually.
I mean, but well,
I like
yeah,
that.
because we talk a lot about like getting off of Earth in terms of making sure that all of our manufacturing is happening
I
elsewhere.
mean, it's
like
also
there's-
nice to have like a backup hard drive, right? You know, even if we keep Earth as this amazing, we keep learning how to take better care of it.
Earth
live in
is gonna die. Even if you do all of that, like the sun will go out at some point.
long time from now. But
The
yeah.
long time,
Yeah.
but it doesn't matter. I'm not talking about next week or next month. I'm like, there's a thing that has been happening here for billions of years. And it will keep happening for another billion years, but or however long the sun continues, or however long our solar system stays stable, right? Because we're talking to a guy who does planetary sciences in a couple weeks, and he's talking about the fact that, you can have a sun pass close enough to the solar system to destabilize it. You can have the planet just get shot off into outer space. Things can happen that are not billions of years from now
Or just get hit
events.
by a freaking comet or
Like,
something.
right? Like there's so much stuff that can happen, so that we know for a fact that this planet, if everything that has ever been made here remains here, it will be as if it never, ever happened. Nothing will matter. Not the birds, not the caterpillars, not the dinosaurs, not the symphonies, not the paintings, not the love. And
Yeah, if I could just interject, like I also really like to think about it in terms of like what if you look at like a beehive or something, some natural construction, it's like you can kind of divine its purpose. Like you can look at it and see, okay, these are the chambers where they do this and they're trying to make this and they store this honey stuff, and like it all makes sense. And I sometimes try to like zoom out like really far and look at the earth and the cities and like, what is this earth doing with these humans? Like what's the point of making the humans? If you can anthropomorphize and kind of take like a Gaian perspective, like why did the earth do this? What is the role of these things? And I like to think that it's something really positive and like a protector role in some sense.
like we are the fruit
Yeah.
of the earth. If the earth is an organism, like
We're like
Shiloh
a bunch of
said.
sperms, basically.
Or eggs.
Or-
What? You have to have both sperm and eggs. What is this like?
We're the sperm eggs, the gametes.
We're the fruits. Like we carry the seeds within us. And so there is this very beautiful human desire to protect and to catalog and to save. You know, the seed banks and the stories of the ark and the mythologies that we have of the role that we play in protecting the earth. And yeah, it's been a couple hundred years of absolute monster capitalism, and that's been dark.
But there's like less poverty than ever before at the same time.
And I really can't stand to think of humans as being a negative thing, because I think that we're the only hope of anything on this planet surviving the catastrophe that is absolutely going to happen.
Yeah. I see where people are coming from. Like, there is definitely a shift in like humans bad. And like, I see where they're at. Like, we fuck up in a lot of ways, but I do really also understand and hear what you're saying too. Like, we're the only thing capable of, understanding that a meteor is coming to destroy all of South America. So like, we can also help protect the Amazon in that sense, from being obliterated by a rock. And yeah, so it's an interesting thought for sure. Like stewardship, I guess. Yeah.
And I think that that's why science is so important, and it's such a battleground right now, because it's the way in which we decide what is the correct thing to do. And I'm not saying right as in moral. I'm saying correct as in you take an action and get the desired outcome because you understand the underlying mechanism with sufficient precision to be able to predict the impact of your actions accurately.
I might need you to repeat that.
So check it out. Like,
yeah.
Science is really important because it is the way that we tell stories about mechanism. Science is the art of explaining how something happens.
Cause and effect.
Cause and effect, yeah, exactly. And so if we're wrong about cause and effect, then we will always make the incorrect decision, because we will be like, well, if we take this action, this will be the effect. But if we're wrong about that relationship, then we will take a disastrous action.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right. So you see this scattered through modern industrial cultures pretty frequently. Like we use DDT. DDT got rid of all the insects. We thought that was a really good thing. And then we were like, oh, shit, we need the insects, number one. And number two, it destroys ecosystems. And then you get ecosystem knowledge and you realize that your understanding of cause and effect is completely lacking and you have to redefine everything. And we do this all the time where we take actions that we think are going to come up with a specific result. And we get to the other side of the action, we're like, oh,
I think that's why the climate thing is just such a mess right now. It's why it's such a polarizing issue for people. It's like, are we making the right decisions that will lead to the actual betterment of our own endeavor and our harmony with the planet? Because, some of the solutions like aren't really considering second, third order effects. Like, hey, we should all drive electric cars. And then it's like, wait a second, really, is that the solution? Or like, maybe we shouldn't just have really nice train lines in America instead or something, but that's not really presented as like the solution. And it's like, those cars are disgusting. Those electric cars, like the batteries are mined by like child slaves in Africa. And like the tires are just completely polluting the water tables. Like they're made out of petroleum. All the body parts are made out of petroleum. Like they're just disgusting entities. But like the better solution isn't even part of the conversation because people get so like hung up on trying to like defend some scientific perspective. It's just really troubling to me.
Right. Yeah. Or the fact that we keep a rectangle that connects to the internet so close to our genitals every day in our pocket. Like that just
stop doing that.
Yeah. Like,
sometimes
no,
I fall
see what you guys are
asleep
saying,
with my
though.
cell phone under my pillow, and I'm
Don't
generally
do
get worried
that.
about
Don't do
that.
Yeah, I've been doing it since I was 7th grade. So
Well,
I got a cell phone. Like whatever happens with that when I'm 80 is definitely occurring in me right now. Yeah, but there's a lot of. That's what's interesting about anthropology because I'm assuming you guys saw Oppenheimer, right?
Mhm.
opening night.
Okay, yeah, well, we did too. And I also wondered why there were so many people. I was like, wow. And then I realized Barbie was out the same day. That checks out. But
We were actually quite torn about which one to see, but we ended up seeing Oppenheimer instead.
I saw someone say you can choose, like, pick between the two movies, and you can watch one and have an existential crisis, and then you can go see Oppenheimer.
Awesome.
But in the movie, the whole thing, it's so fast paced, and it's about science, and like, you know, the American military is like, hey, the Soviets and the Nazis are going to do this. We need your science. Like, we need this. There's nothing in anthropology really or archaeology that will ever be that dire. And I was thinking the whole time, like, what would there be where there'd be a movie about an archaeologist doing this? And the only thing I could think of is if, you know, we unearth an alien crash site somewhere and it's sensitive and we need archaeologists to analyze the right, you know, I'm sure that's the topic of some sci-fi books, but
Jurassic Park.
yeah, there's that too. I guess that's paleontology, but still along the same lines. No, you're all
How
good.
dare you?
Common mistake. Common mistake. But I mean, same thing. Field scientist that has the actions that they take or we take aren't going to dictate nuclear proliferation or, you know, COVID vaccines and things like that. It's just we study people, and it's usually objective, but it's still done scientifically. So
yeah, like how does that play into the funding paradigm too? Like,
Hold on, before we get to the funding paradigm, I wanna, can I?
yeah.
I wonder if the other way in which it becomes really important isn't just an alien civilization, but it is the discovery of a technologically advanced civilization on Earth that predates the one that we have now.
Are we going to Graham Hancock now?
Well, I think that you can't talk about this stuff without ending up with Graham Hancock at some point. But even setting let's set aside everything that Graham Hancock has ever done and the Atlantean and everything else, and think about it without that burden hanging over us, and say, excuse me,
what if?
that if you were to find that would be a radical change to the way that we understand ourselves and everything that our society does, because if it is possible to get to a technological height and then fall from it back down to hunter-gatherers during an ice age, then we probably should be thinking about our own civilization in a radically different way. And I find it impossible to believe that it wouldn't change absolutely everything.
It might be a don't look up situation, you know, like there's we're still, it's going to be like, hey, the climate's shifting, like we might need to control that a bit, and then that's what happened to these people, and people might not change still. But I do agree that would be like a fundamental BC to AD switch in like human history to figure that out. Second only to aliens coming to visit, like it'd be BC, AD, and then like PC for post contact or something, you know. That would be fundamentally different. And then anthropologists would, I guess, then become like xenopologists, I guess, like studying something that's a foreign, like the lady that was in Avatar that studied the tribe. Yeah, I guess that would be the only weaponized use of an anthropologist in a military fashion. But finding an ancient civ, yeah, that would be, because I got my thoughts on Grant Hancock, but it's just, it would be game changing. I would agree.
Do you think that Graham's onto something?
I think one, people lambast him because he's done a bunch of psychedelics. I don't lambast him for that at all. I think it's interesting. Well, they use that to like take his credibility away, but
Really, I haven't encountered that.
yeah, he talked about it on Rogan a few times, and I've seen several people say it too in person. But I listen to him. I'm open to him. I used to be like vehemently opposed to him, but like the more I listened, I listened to America Before. I think he's a journalist. He's very good at speaking. He's a great orator, and he tells a good story. But there's just no, the way he constructs it is that not that he can't be wrong. It's just that everything he says could be true. And he's very good at that. And to that point, it could be true. It's just there's zero evidence for it. Like I've dug so many holes, there's nothing past Clovis in a lot of places. And if there was some giant civilization that disappeared, we would see something of it, I think. And like, he's never dug archaeological sites to my knowledge or surveyed. Like
I think he did a bunch of offshore, like a bunch of dives for his, at least for like 50 dives or something for his first, one of those, the first book. There's a book, blue cover.
Fingerprint of the Gods?
No, it's about underwater stuff. Really, really entertaining thing. I read it like when I was in my 20s.
But I think that's not the same as digging.
But he was diving for these archaeological sites, I guess. I mean, my thought is that if there is like on the off possibility that there is some advanced civilization that we're missing out on, it's probably underwater, because most archaeology is above water. And it seems like most archaeology is not also hypothesis driven. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like usually some farmer like stumbles across something when he's plowing his field, and then people start digging because they're like, okay, we got a site here, we can get a bunch of money and excavate it. But there's not a lot of, other than like Troy, it seems like there's not a lot of people being like, I think there would be a civilization here, let's go dig there. You know, just off of a hunch or off of mythology or something. And so I wonder how much of that is just, you know, our what, 300 feet of sea rise since the last glaciation? Quite a bit. I mean, we've lost a lot of coastline, and people still love to live by the coast. Most of us live by the coast. I think the majority of people still live within something like 60 miles of the coast. I just wonder if there's some secrets hiding underwater still.
There's tons, especially for early American migration. Like, there's a lot of stuff in the ocean that we will never see, especially because it was probably made out of wood and sealskin. So, like, they're just gone. But to your point there, yes, a lot of stuff is found. Like, they found a mammoth in the 70s eroding out of a river on private land in Wyoming. The landowner wouldn't let the university do anything with it until he died, and his son let him do it. And then, so the mammoth was found, right? But then, and there's some stone tools and it's around it, so there's people. But then you go in, not just digging to dig to see what's there, you dig to, with a hypothesis of like, you know, I wonder, was it a winter camp? How many people were here? Was this Clovis? And you're looking to see, like, if I have X amount of this type of tool, we can say this is a large mammal hunting group. And that's kind of where it goes, but you're still unearthing it to see what's there at the same time. And a lot of what Graham Hancock says too, and this is what irks me. One, he vilifies archaeologists for not doing like, specifically, he'll lump all archaeologists into, they think this, but like, it's not everyone thinks that, especially newer students. And then two, he'll go on about the Amazon saying like, no archaeologist will look into this. Like, why are they not doing this? And like, as if he's the only one who is. But you guys mentioned funding before. No one is going to fund you to trek through the Amazon with a machete to find something that might not be there, especially when archaeology is so underfunded already. So I would love to go check that stuff out. It's just, you don't know what's there, so it might just be a waste of money. And then we also didn't know it was there until there was LiDAR. So it's like, I don't know. And just, I think that helps sell his argument, and he does it very well. And there's no Neil Tyson or Bill Nye for anthropology, and he's the closest thing there is now. And he's done a very good job of filling that, because he knows what he's talking about. And I would love to meet him. I don't think I could debate him in any way. He's very good at talking. But I don't think he's wrong. I just don't think there's any way to prove most of what he's saying. And yeah, I don't.
Is it just not feasible to dig off the coast?
You can do like, what's the word? Scuba diving and things like that, and diving, but the thing with prehistoric archaeology is all that's left is the stone tools. That's all we get. So underwater, to find, like, you'd have to find not only a lithic scatter of like stone tool debris, but then be able to identify how many are there, or even if it is a tool, or humans made it. Because the wood, the impressions in the soil where the post holes would have been for a house are just gone. Like it's not going to be there underwater. So, but like historic archaeology in the Caribbean, you can obviously tell, oh, that's a Spanish doubloon. Like, let's dig that up, and you can see a ship and stuff. But am I making sense with that? It's just, it's very,
I mean, diving's no joke too, right? I actually don't scuba dive, but I do a lot of just free diving, and it's not easy, right? It just seems like what percentage of people are archaeologists, and then what percentage of those are able to dive, right?
yeah.
Well, even just for physical reasons, like it's a very physically exerting endeavor, from what I understand. Dangerous.
But I'm also just not sure if it's possible to dig a hole with transects in it the way that it is
I see what you're saying.
above
Mm,
Yeah.
ground.
I think my friend that does shipwreck archaeology in Queensland is like, you lay out a grid, just like you would in an excavation, but like you don't really dig, you just kind of map and survey what's there. And she looks up old ships that were whaling ships, or a ship that was bombed by the Japanese. She does a lot of that kind of stuff, but she's not digging up prehistoric things. And there's a lot of people that want to do that. Texas A&M has a great underwater archaeology program too.
Hmm.
It's just it's hard to fund that, especially when like you're funding in the hopes of finding one or two stone tools off the coast of Oregon. You know,
Yeah,
it's
where's the money come from in archaeology for the most part? Is it
uh
private foundations, and who's paying
depends.
for it?
We have here at Wyoming, is like the Friesen Institute, which is privately funded, or I guess it's publicly funded, but people donate. A lot of it, like the site we dug last year, was National Science Foundation funded. Nat Geo did it 1 year, and then another site was Wyoming Cultural Heritage Fund. So you get it in that sense, but it definitely, you can just tell when you're on campuses that unless it's archaeology is the main thing at the school, engineering or biology or something always gets a better building and things like that because it's more practical, I would say. So
Definitely more industrial.
yeah. Um, I don't know. Where the money comes from, I don't know, but that's a interesting question too, because I always see people say follow the money when like there's an archaeology thing or Graham Hancock says something, and it's like there's no money. Most of my friends make under $25 an hour, like with masters. And it's like I would love a cut of that money if there is money somewhere, but um, I don't know how else it works. I mean, I guess you're a professor. The Do you make more money for more publications? I don't know. I guess you
Yeah, I
guys
mean, you have to get grants, right? I'm not a research professor, so we both teach. We're just lecturers at the university. But when we used to work in research, and it's all about that grant, right? You need to basically be able to tell the grantor what you're going to find and why it's going to be valuable to industrial progress, and then you can get some money to work on it. And hopefully, if you have some time left over, maybe you can play with something more curious and basic. But I think just like finding ways to fund curiosity-driven basic science is really hard in all disciplines, right? Like, you can easily fund these engineering endeavors, but finding the space to do just basic curiosity, how does nature work, what happened kind of questions is very tricky, I think, across all of the domains, which is why I think the future is going to be showing more of these independent research institutions, like more people really just getting together, getting some billionaire dollars, whatever, finding some sugar daddy to basically support these more hypothetical, hypothesis-driven research projects, whether it's basic physics or archaeology.
Or YouTube. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that about this all the time, where when you have an audience and you can get people interested in a certain subject, and then people want you to go and do a dig, and then you make content on the basis of what the audience wants and is interested in, that's this feedback loop that I feel like a lot of archaeologists probably are reluctant to take on because, like you said, the characters that are doing that are the Graham Hancocks and the Randall Carlsons. And these are people that are functionally excluded from the archaeological community on what I take to be emotional grounds. People don't like Graham Hancock, and they're really mean about it, and they don't listen to his presentations, and they're just kind of jerks.
He's like not in the club. He like
He's
doesn't
not
have
in the
the
club,
paper and
and
stuff.
I
And that's
think
where
that
I was at too. I just like everyone was like, "Oh fuck Graham Hancock," and I was too for a bit, and then I listened to him, heard him out, and his new show. Sorry to interrupt, but his new show that he put out, it was Ancient Apocalypse, I think.
it was on
He went,
Netflix. Yeah,
yeah, he went on about how he wanted to look at a site, but the archaeologist said like, no, and he read the letter that they wrote him, and I'm like, that only fuels more interest in him. And then the entire Society of American Archaeology, which is I'm part of, and I respect it as an organization, sent a letter, like a cease and desist letter to Netflix saying, don't allow this on there. And like
Wow.
that only fuels more people to know, like, to think that one, archaeologists are hiding something, which they're not. It's just they don't like his opinions. And a lot of people construe them as racist and colonial, which I can see where they come from sometimes. But to do that only further fuels more people to believe him. And I if I was on a board to vote against that, I would have voted 10 times no, So.
yeah, and I totally see where you're coming from with that, because he might not be right, but he fuels a lot of interest in the discipline and brings people into a place where they actually care about something that's generally pretty remote from their daily interests.
Yeah.
It's well outside the realm of things that people care about when it comes to, the next big technological breakthrough. It's literally just trying to understand the basis of where we came from. And I think he overrepresents with certainty the conclusions that he can draw from the symbolism that he derives. Like there's in that Ancient Apocalypse,
And that's something mainstream scientists would never do.
that's the thing,
Oh,
they
connecting
do.
the dots between things, yeah.
Yeah, but they do it in a way that is within the confines of what's acceptable. And so I think that people are reluctant who are well-trained in archaeologists. What were you going to say?
I was going to say there's guys like at the top of the physics food chain who are telling you that they can tell you with very high certainty what happened like fractions of a second after the beginning of the universe. And it's like, it gives me the same vibes where I'm just like, what are you talking about?
Well, that's acceptable we should dig into why that's acceptable and why Graham Hancock isn't acceptable. Let me wrap my point though. My point is that I think that well-trained archaeologists are maybe reluctant to go down this road because it would ostracize you from the societies that you love.
Yep.
Where there's a bifurcation point that is maintained stringently by shrieking harpies that would say that there lies not science and not reputable, and if you dare step in that direction, we will forget that your name ever existed. And I think that that's a horrifying thing, because if you've spent 10, 15 years of your life pursuing something and you've made friends and you've participated in these professional societies and you have a publication record, then it takes a very, very special kind of person who can say, you know what, fuck all y'all, I'm going to do this.
Yeah. And I respect those people that do it. Not that I've ostracized myself, but I know I have fundamental disagreements on legislation and stuff with archaeology things with some colleagues that aren't in the norm, but like we're still friends and like talk and stuff. It's just like it is weird to diverge from the group thing sometimes, which I hate saying. But definitely after COVID and like all the misinformation and stuff, like it got worse with Graham Hancock for sure. Cause it's like, what is science and what is the right science, But largely it's just that, and when I'm on podcasts all the time, people will tell me, I can't understand your egghead shit sometimes when they talk to me. And like the way scientists, especially archaeologists, talk about archaeology and science is boring. Like it's just so boring. And they need to be better at speaking. And that's my whole thing. Like people will follow me because I can condense something down and say fuck at the middle of like it just, we need more of that, and it needs to be taught more. And Graham Hancock excels at that. And I think they're not that it's jealousy, it's just that we need to put more funding into not being boring and teaching people how to use media to talk, I think.
Yeah, it's a fine line between like dumbing things down and then also just and saying them in a way that's understandable and exciting. Like there's a because it seems like the dichotomy for most scientists in their mind is like either I say this like you're a 5-year-old or I speak in code. But it seems like that's kind of beyond the point. Like the point is really about making it relevant to your life and to who you are and to the world that you've come up in and actually painting a picture that's vivid and understandable for people.
Yeah.
Like you can explain really complicated stuff to people if you understand it well, and you can do it in language that's not perplexing, but they're still not going to listen if it's not an exciting story or if there's not some take home that's like relevant to their lives. I think Graham's probably really good at that.
And
I mean, that book is so fun to read. I read that when I was like 22 or something. I was just like, this is amazing. I didn't even then, I wasn't really much of a scientist by then, but I was like, I didn't think it was true necessarily, but I was like, this is a really, really fascinating read. You know, it's a page turner.
And that's what makes it so effective. And it's also not talking down to you. I feel like there's a lot of science out there where we're always looking for podcasts to listen to because when we cook dinner together, we want to listen to something that like lets you learn something, you figure something out. And once you filter out the things that are basically just vessels for advertising, you get a lot of stuff that's just talking to you like you are an idiot that has never cracked an idea open in your entire life. And I find it hard to believe that even somebody who is not a PhD wants to be talked to that way.
Yeah.
And it's so common that just the level of discourse in these podcasts treats people as if they cannot be trusted with complex ideas. They cannot be trusted with the very edge of the way that we understand nature, because if they were entrusted with it, then it would be the equivalent of opening Pandora's box and chaos would envelop the earth and we would all die.
Yeah. I'm trying to put into words how to express that, but it is, or I'm trying to find an example of somebody that talks like that, but I know what you mean. I don't think Andrew Huberman kind of talks down to people in a way. He's a very effective communicator, apparently, but...
Well, Huberman is a different category for me because I listened to Huberman's podcast, and that was basically the substance, because I got a degree in biochemistry.
Okay.
And so it's like sitting in lecture for me, and I never liked approaching biology in that way.
Okay.
And so he's super, super popular. He doesn't talk down to anybody. He's very mechanistic and he's very, like Stanford professor, like he's giving a lecture. But I can't get into it because it's not story driven enough for me. I really need this
podcast.
Yeah, like I need if you're going to tell me a bunch of facts about biology, I need you to wrap them into something that is not just a set of molecular instructions for what time of day I should drink coffee at,
Gotcha. Yeah, like biohack stuff. Yeah.
But he's super popular, so clearly people like that. And so I think that that's not what I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of
scientists spend a lot of time talking to each other, right? And they develop almost a cultural language by which they'll be able to talk about the specifics. And at some point, I think they spend so much time doing that they just forget how to talk to anybody else, essentially. It's like, I had the occasion, one of my first labs that I was in, our PI was basically like, hey man, you need to be able to explain what you're doing, what your research is about to your grandma. Like, if you can't do that, you don't understand it well enough. And it's not a particularly like unique witticism like that. That's absolutely true, but it's really hard to do, actually. It's really hard to take something super technical and really understand it so well that you can explain it to your friend, who's never been in a science lab before. It's not easy. And so I think there's something that you have to really, like, that's probably why Hancock is a journalist, right? He learned how to communicate to people first before he even started messing with this science stuff. Whereas most scientists are probably spending all their time with the science and very little time trying to communicate any of it.
I got asked to be on the SAA, I think it was not communications, but like outreach panel or something. I can't remember what it was. Anyway, it was just, the whole panel was just Ask David, because I know what I'm doing, I guess. But they were asking me about communication, and I said, I have 22, this was a few years ago, 2,200 characters in an Instagram, just like caption to explain something with a picture. If you can't tell me your dissertation in 2,200 characters, why is anyone going to like listen to it? And I don't remember if they agreed or disagreed, but they all nodded their heads. And to me, it's just like, that's how it should be. Cause like people just scroll through, like they don't have time for that. And I've tried to explain, like we had our own podcast, A Life in Ruins, and we'd have colleagues come on because we wanted to give, grad students a way to explain what they're doing. Cause if they're not publishing or they're not a huge professor, like no one's going to know their research. So let them talk about it. And so many just talk in the technical sense about what it is, what they're doing, and then we would try to be like, okay, so what you're saying is, and express it, and not dumb it down, but just going on about like isotopes and like molecular things. Sometimes it goes over people's heads, and there just needs to be I think TikTok is a way that it's changing, and like YouTube shorts and stuff, because you have to get the information out quickly. It makes misinformation sometimes, but people are getting better at expressing a point very quickly in an entertaining way. Yeah.
I think that there's a really fine line between getting lost in the details and oversimplifying, where you need to figure out the interesting aspects of the story. But I think a lot of people that work in the sciences actually have no idea why their work is interesting. Like, I think that they literally have never sat down and thought about it. They do it because they've done it for years.
Like they might know the like tagline you need to get the grant, like this is relevant for this X, Y, and Z reasons technologically or whatever. But in terms of like, why is this fascinating? Like, why should this grip me? That's sometimes lost.
Yeah, and it's really tragic because I feel like that's a product of the pressure that people are under when they're in grad school and inside of the academy. Like, I spend way more time reading literature and thinking about scientific questions now than I ever did when I was in grad school. Because in grad school, it was literally every single day was just laid out in experiments. There was a thing that I needed to accomplish. I took a couple of months at the start of my PhD to do a literature review. I figured out everything that had to happen, and then I kind of ran through the experiments until I was done. And I had guidance from my PI, but it wasn't like I spent hours a day reading and trying to figure out, how did we come to these conclusions about these molecules inside of these bacteria that have brought us here over the course of multiple generations?
How did our cells learn how to breathe, essentially?
Yeah, right? And so it's like there's no time to be able to figure out these intricacies. And so you sit somebody down and you're like, let's talk about your work. And they're like, well, I have a molecular paradigm to tell you about because that's what I spend all my time doing. They don't know what that means yet, because the meaning of the science is what's interesting. It's not the day-to-day details.
To what you said before too, with that, like that just people don't know what they're doing, like why what they're doing is interesting. And like that grad school culture is like, I got in there kind of knowing what I wanted to do. I wanted to do dog research, but it's a very lithic hunter-gatherer driven school is why I went there. And it was just more practical to do an experiment with stone tools, which is what I did. And I really enjoyed it. But like a lot of people, like you feel that pressure. I have to have a thesis topic. I have to come out with it this quickly. I have to tell my professors how I'm going to do it. I'm also going to compete with all 6 of the people in my cohort for the same job if I get a PhD. And you feel constantly inferior. You feel constantly dumb, at least in my experience. And like you're trying to impress your professors in a way, like it's just, you don't want to come off as that in a discussion class. I don't know if it's the same in your guys' field, but. And then in all of that, yeah, you're very right. Like you just get lost in explaining to your friends, like what I'm doing is why it matters. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it was pretty brutal. We went to the grad school in New York City, and like New York City is kind of even beyond grad school. Like everybody's like out to get everybody else. Basically, like there's ladders everywhere, and there's only so many people who can be on that ladder, and so it's like very, very ripe with, competition, and a lot of innovation comes out of that, but it also makes the sort of playful, curious side of science nearly impossible at the same time. Don't forget about the conference next April in Austin, Texas, where we're going to be getting together in person, and I would love to see you there.
I just think about the way that it's constructed, where you go back 100 years and you think about what it meant to get a PhD
Mhm.
and who went to go get a PhD and why they went to go get a PhD. And there was something really funny, again, Gregor Mendel. He became a priest because he wanted to be able to have a life where he no longer had to worry about money. And he wanted to be able to just devote himself to studying, and because at the time priests
He
basically
became a monk, right?
monk, yeah,
Monk, yeah.
sorry, not priest. But the monks would live in the abbeys and they would have experimental gardens and they would do experiments and they would contribute to scientific knowledge. And so he basically devoted himself to that because his family was poor. There wasn't a place for him on the farm, and so he left home and he became an intellectual and figured out Mendelian inheritance. But
Right.
it wasn't because he needed to climb a career ladder to get an R01 grant from the government. It was basically to live as close to the foundations of where his interests were, because he was just somebody who was really curious about the way that nature worked. And I feel like the structures that we have right now with science have more to do about performing really well inside of the system than they do about spending a lot of time trying to answer questions that might not have any technological application. All of your energy is put towards climbing the ladder. And you can only, when you leave that moment, can you spend a lot of time, for most people. Obviously there's exceptions, but only when you really extricate yourself from that can you spend time thinking freely about, well, what does it all mean? How does it all fit together?
Yeah, because you're told, get your undergrad, then either do your master's at the same school, find another school, then do your PhD, or if it's a master's PhD, and then it's just like it's steps you have to go through is what I've always seen it as. And then if you're lucky, you get a position at a school that's not in the middle of Idaho somewhere, like uh nothing wrong against Idaho, it's just not, Brooklyn. But that's a really good point, because Darwin's dad was like, you need to be a doctor. Like Erasmus? No, his grandfather's Erasmus. I forget his dad's name. You need to be a doctor, but he would throw up when he saw blood. So he went on the Beagle and then got really interested in genetics and stuff, So it's just
Yeah, but think about what it would mean to go on the Beagle, right? You're out
Right.
on the sea for long periods of time, traveling to all these places, just looking at nature. There's no clock to punch. He didn't really even have a boss. He just was curious, and so he was looking at stuff.
Yeah.
And that's not humanly possible inside of the academy right now, to just sit around and look at stuff and to just voyage on a ship.
Einstein was a patent clerk, right?
Yeah.
You need that time to just space out and think about things.
Huh.
And I feel like to bring this back to the financial incentives is that YouTube is a really interesting new medium for this, because you can crowdsource funding to be able to do something interesting on the basis of maximizing for your curiosity and the curiosity of the audience. And as long as you have the drive to do it, I have to believe that it's possible, because that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. YouTube is, you can find anything. Like, I cook because of YouTube. I know how to fix my computer, my car. I live in a converted, well, I live inside and in the school bus that I converted, but like knowing how to do all the electrical stuff, like you couldn't do that. You'd have to go to the library and like friggin' figure out the Dewey Decimal System, find the book you want, and hope it tells you what to do. But now, like, and like if there's something, my Honda, like the window wouldn't roll up anymore, so I had to watch some video of some like middle-aged dad with the camera at his hips, no face in it whatsoever, and it was shaky, explaining how to like open up the door and fix the window. And like, that's amazing. And I'm digressing, but so much good anthropology content is on there that is, some of them are my friends that are very factual. Stefan Milo, he's like one of the best YouTubers I've seen. Like, he kind of, like, I've watched him go from just starting to now he like is competing with Vox. He's not competing with Vox, but his stuff is made like that. It's very good. He has a team. Curiosity Stream bought him out. Like that isn't, to me, like a very, what's the word? That's just as cool to me as getting a PhD, because to me, like I love the dog stuff. I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to get a PhD after grad school because that was just the next step to do. But all I really want to do with that is just be able to do more dog research, which I've just been doing, making my videos and my posts and stuff. And I'm already doing what I would do. It'd be nice to have doctor in front of my name, but like I don't need it. But yeah, if I had enough following and I wanted to go do an expedition or fund a dig somewhere, I could probably just be like, hey, anyone want to fund this? And people that are interested would do it. And I think you mentioned the interested billionaire thing. That is definitely where science is going, I think. Yeah.
I really think so. Yeah, we got the funding to write our first book from somebody who just believed in the idea that we wanted to put out and was like, I'll give you guys money to write this book.
Wow.
And yeah, he wanted to remain anonymous, but it really gave me a lot of hope about like the future of intellectual progress, because we were trying to write a book about something that doesn't fit inside the academy, right? It's like something that we just have no chance of getting a grant for, essentially, because it's just clearly outside of the framework that's interesting to, and not to say that their framework isn't interesting, it is, and it's very technologically useful and so forth, but if you want to do something else, you have to search for alternative means. And yeah, man, just like doing this podcast and everything has just been like it's really like given me a lot of hope for the future, actually, in a lot of ways. Like just seeing people come out to support the channel and like seeing how you don't really need an institution to make things to move the needle. It's pretty cool, even in our own little way, you know. We have a lot of hope for that.
Yeah. And I will say, like, you guys both presented to me that you have been through academia. You both have your PhDs, right? So I imagine like stuff on your podcast, like you would know if it's bullshit if someone's saying something, or maybe. But I do wonder with other podcasts, especially when I listen to comedy podcasts, like the stuff that's talked about on there, I don't know what's accurate. And then there's a lot of people that don't have degrees in archaeology or anthropology, but have podcasts or YouTube channels that I don't know what their credibility is. And if they don't cite their sources, I don't know if it's right. So there's a lot of that. And I wonder, like, I don't know where I'm going with this, but like, there should just be a way that like
how reliable is that extra institutional knowledge? I mean, I guess that's the one thing that the academy has going for it, is that they can claim reliability, right? There's this competence hierarchy inside the academy, and presumably the best and most reliable research rises to the top, and therefore it's trustworthy and so forth. But out on the internet, like, anybody can say anything, kind of thing.
Yeah, but I don't know if it's an ingrained thing in me just to like at face value just know like, okay, these guys know what they're talking about. I'm not saying you guys don't, but other podcasts and stuff too, like I kind of have to take it on. I guess what I'm trying to say is like things that I learn on podcasts, I will take and then might regurgitate too, or I let it like come into my head when I'm talking, and I don't know if that's true or not, but I do usually look it up if it's something I'm going to post about. So yeah, I guess where I'm going is maybe academia should allow for this to be a totally fine medium, and instead of like being a professor at a podium or something. I don't know.
I think that the institution is always going to do its thing. The institution has all kinds of things that come along with it that I think are really powerful to it. And the pathways to understanding things outside of that are just going to depend on people being really careful, because like you said, you can say whatever you want on a podcast. There's no obligation to say something that's factually accurate. Eventually
we're like really like really trying hard to make sure that our speech is proper, like in our daily lives, like not even on this podcast, but like if I say something that's like a slight exaggeration, like Anastasia will be like, you can't say that. And I'm just like, what do you mean? Like, you know what I mean? I'm just trying to say something, and it's not like we're on air or anything. And she's like, no, like, we just can't be people that say things that are inaccurate. And
I catch myself doing that a lot. Yeah.
It's interesting to try to retrain yourself to just be extremely, excruciatingly precise in the statements that you make. It's very hard to do, but I think that it's valuable in the end. I mean,
I got it from my sister, actually, because my sister would always, we would get into arguments about stuff, and I had a tendency to exaggerate. I had a tendency to misrepresent things. I was very much not a clear thinker. And she was always the one who was like, if you want people to take you seriously, you cannot misrepresent things, even in the slightest way, even if it's a little bit of an exaggeration, just because you think it's going to make for a better story.
Sure.
That murders your credibility because people know that you lie a little bit all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a hard thing to get out from under, because once you have the reputation of being somebody who can't be trusted,
right,
your name is gone, and that's all that you ever have. And I don't think that it's possible to reconstruct your name after becoming known as somebody who doesn't really get it right.
Especially in an education space, yeah, or intellectual space. I often say, and it's just a habit, like the oldest dog burial or the first dog burial, and I'll say that obviously it's not the first. Like we don't know that it's the first. It's just the oldest that we know of, and in my head that's implied. But to people who don't understand archaeology, it might be like, oh, and I've been called out by it in the comments before, which is justified. But I just kind of explain. And you have to be defensive in a way, just like, well, it's implied when I say that, and I'll put in the comment like, I hope everyone knows when I say that this is what I mean. But it's things like that I learn every day that I have to be mindful of what I say, because people listen to what I say and then share it with people, and like you can see the numbers of how it is shared with people, and it's a lot of responsibility. And then
I think that's why I started getting mad at Shiloh, because Shiloh would say things and I would just take it at face value. I'm like, well, if Shiloh said it, it must be true. And then I'd say it in conversation with other people and they would be like, that's not true. And I would then come back to Shiloh and be like, how dare you? How could you have put me in this position? I took you at your word.
Yeah, there's something really healthy about like publishing these things. I put all my lectures from the university online too, and I've found that it really forces me to, knowing that what I say on any given morning is going to be like preserved in internet space forever or for a long time. I'm just like very, very careful about the things that I say too. And I think that's been really healthy actually. Because I mean, if no one's watching, if you're only speaking to 50 people or something, maybe it doesn't matter as much. But I think that's kind of healthy, I think that in a sense, this kind of deals with the problem you brought up earlier, which is like, I don't know if I can trust these things online or these podcasts and so forth. And it's like, well, the ones that survive, you probably can, because the ones like people lose their credibility and they never get it back. And it's like over time, it kind of sorts itself out. It's like we had this dude on the podcast. It was really fascinating. This kind of like philosopher of science guy named Adam Mastroianni. And he was trying to like, he had this really unique perspective where he was like, look, everybody's so obsessed with like finding all of the cheaters in science and the people who fabricate data and all this. And he's like, that's kind of a waste of time because, maybe 10% of the papers are garbage or whatever, but it doesn't matter because the ones that really move the world are the ones that everybody realizes are true because they can put these things into effect in the world. Like the theories actually make the world more useful in some way. Like they actually allow you to do something in the world. And they get tested by people using those ideas or using those theories. And all of the garbage at the bottom, like it just gets ignored essentially, which I thought was like a pretty radical perspective. It's like almost advocating that it's a self-correcting process. Like you don't really need all these gatekeepers because like there's going to be garbage and you can just walk past it at the end of the day.
I noticed that on Reddit a few years ago when I was really big into Reddit, like things that are upvoted to the top, if it was, for the most part, I would say like 70% of the time, maybe more, if it was factually inaccurate, it wouldn't be at the top. It wouldn't be the top comment because everyone is like, actually, and like we'll say a bunch of that. So the general consensus, if it's voted up to the top, is probably that it's, not bullshit. But then again, like with, how do you know if, there's always something that could be wrong with it. But
yeah, the only problem you run into with that is like, then there might have been things that would have moved to the top, but like some moderator didn't like them for some reason. So you like don't know what you're missing too. But in terms of the information that remains, yeah, I think it does self-correct.
Kind of. I think that when we operate at the very, very edge of knowledge, that starts to get really tricky because consensus is something that operates well away from the margin of what is. And so some date about, this is the date where fire was invented, might have some consensus in the literature, but there might be somebody who's doing digs who's finding evidence that points to something else, and there's a different story that they're telling. I don't know. I don't know enough archaeology to know that this is the case.
Yeah, I would say that's like in similar situations. Yeah.
Right. And so the actual knowledge is not the consensus figure. The actual knowledge is all of this blurry stuff that lives on top of it that hasn't yet been formulated, but is the direction where consensus is heading 10 years from now or something like that.
Yeah. Very much. Yeah, I would say so.
And I think that that's why people get bored of Reddit eventually, because you spend some time there and you realize that there are these kind of midwit ideas that float to the top. And the place where knowledge is being born can't live on Reddit, because Reddit is the hive mind that can only tolerate what is firmly accepted.
Yeah. Like knowledge goes there secondhand from people who learn it and then teach it, and then it's shared there, and then people from there can, dictate what happens to it, or like if it's right, or like, is that where you're going with that?
Yeah, where it's like, okay, so if you go to the archaeology subreddit, how do they feel about Graham Hancock?
Love them.
They love.
Depends on the subreddit. Main archaeology, I think it's banned. But
that's exactly the point I'm trying to make.
Okay.
Right, that there's a main archaeology subreddit where they're like, fuck that guy, fuck those ideas. Those ideas are not allowed to be even entertained. And you're like, what is the schoolmarm instinct that drives people to eradicate even the consideration of an idea that when you sit down with it and you really start to look at it, you're like, he has decent evidence.
Right.
Like you might not like the guy, but he's not making stuff up.
My last experience on Reddit was I wrote a blog about, basically advocating that our model of the atom isn't a material model. It's fundamentally a mathematical model. And I was essentially advocating for how it would be really useful if we had a material model. And it was rocketing up our physics. And then the mods just threw it out and said, it's not physics, it's philosophy. So I posted it in our philosophy, rocketed up our philosophy, and then the mods threw it out because they said it was physics and not philosophy. And so I'm just like, screw this place. Like, I'm not dealing with these people. But it's an interesting trap like that, right?
That's interesting.
I think that it's significant that there is a place like Reddit, which is supposed to be this place of popular opinion and the way that things get upvoted and filtered to the top on the basis of what is best, where there is a filter of what is allowed that's really strict inside of these really big subreddits. Because you can go post on the Ancient Aliens subreddit, but it's not going to have the same heft as being able to talk about it in the main archaeology room, where there are people that are better versed and smarter and like.
I'm just not going to get like high level critique of your ideas.
That's
right?
it.
Yeah, it's like you're going to be thrown in next to people who are just like making shit up.
Or like, it was definitely aliens, and you're like, can we talk about the actual substance? But you can't, because nobody in the room with the actual substance is willing to sit down and to actually discuss it, and that's alarming to me.
And that creeps into all aspects of life for me too, especially with news and politics, and it does. It has me. How am I trying to say this? Like me sitting down and finally being like, I've been told to not like Graham Hancock and to not listen to anything he has to say, but then to like tell some friends, I sat down and listened to him. I enjoyed what he had to say, but I don't believe it. Like, it was shocking to some people, and then also just doing that with that also allowed me to do that with other things in my life too, like politically wise. And I was like, okay, I've been told in grad school to, every Trumper is, I don't know if you guys want to talk politics at all, but like, Trump bad is just where I'm going at. And that's like kind of the academic thing. And then like I moved to Georgia and was interacting with mostly conservative people. And I was able to hear them more because I'm around it, and it wasn't something I was completely isolated from. And I understand their viewpoints a lot better now, whether that's anthropology or whether that was just the Graham Hancockism in my head. But I wasn't as much of a I can't talk to you kind of thing. And I wish more people were able to think that way. And not saying because that's how I think. I hope it doesn't come across that way, but it made me less stressed. I guess I
Yeah,
can't
of course.
describe it. Yeah.
Well, because there's a tremendous amount of tension in needing to maintain ideas, not because you believe in them, but because somebody told you that you shouldn't accept them.
Yeah.
Like, I have a friend, we went to dinner with a friend of mine who started talking to us about Ayurveda. And this is a lady who's just about to finish, like, Ayurvedic medicine, like the ancient Indian tradition for medical
Like
systems.
balancing your air and fire and chakras and stuff.
Right, you put it in that way and it sounds very dismissive, but at the same point, it's this ancient system of medicine that, like, 1 billion people use regularly in order to be able to get healthy.
Sure.
And there's a bunch of Ayurvedic types. And so she started to talk about it, and I could tell that as she was saying it, she was so conditioned by bringing it up to other PhDs who were going to be like, that's so stupid, that she was having this visceral fight response where she was literally misinterpreting things that I was saying, thinking that I was trying to tell her that it was dumb. And I had to multiple times be like, no, that's not what I'm saying. Like, hold on, this is what I'm actually saying. And it took, I don't know, like 15 or 20 minutes until she worked through the reaction and was like, oh, they don't think it's stupid. Then we could actually have a conversation about it. But it's stuck with me because I'm like, how much of our training as academics is intended to filter us away from certain ideas that are so unpopular that they cannot be considered, and in turn prevents us from being able to talk freely and openly with one another about what might be the case, right? Because we were talking about how she got really into Ayurvedic medicine and she healed a lot of her health problems following the advice that she got from it.
And like the academics know about Galileo, right? Like they know about the deep history of suppression of thought and censorship, and still it's like lost on them. Like there's a whole freaking chapter in my astronomy textbook about how Galileo was so oppressed by the church and everything. And I'm like, it's still happening. Like, guys, come on. Like, it's so strange that people can hold those two ideas in their heads simultaneously.
Yeah. It was hard to watch during COVID for sure with all of that. Like, I don't know, because I don't want to get into like a sticky subject with that, but you know what I'm saying? Just like people arguing about science.
No, it needs to be talked about.
Okay, like
it was really painful for us, by the way, because we were teaching like an immunology class at the time together.
Oh wow.
And we were like reading all of the primary literature as it was coming out, and it was like nothing like what was being messaged as far as the talking points on the news. So I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. I guess where I was going with like is the I don't want to get into like a conspiracy, but just the concept of the lab leak theory was, in my mind, feasible. Like, okay, it's a virus, accidents happen, things can do that. But it was drilled into you by every person on the internet and in the news that you cannot think that way. That is not the case. It came from a pangolin or whatever. And then, like, whether it was weaponized or whether it was an accident, all three of those things are completely possible in my mind. But to be told, like, you can't think that, absolutely not, was very weird to me. And to see a lot of friends, like, say that to me too was kind of weird. And I think now, like, John, what's his name? The guy that did the like Daily Show, Jon Stewart, is all about or he at least admitted that he thinks it's true. And like, it's fine because he said it on Colbert now. And it's like, it's weird. But I also get it, especially at the time where there was like xenophobia for, Asian people. Like I get that aspect of it too. So it's just hard sitting there sometimes, like, for anybody in 2020, just seeing everything happen was just like overwhelming.
And like having grown up under the like belief mythology that, liberal intellectualism, that, we explore ideas and we're really interested in all of the possible hypotheses and we're going to pursue these and really get to the bottom of things. And it was like I think the first time in my life where it was just very clear that that was not the agenda whatsoever. It was like, we've already made up our mind about how this is going to go. We already made up our mind about what the solution to this thing is going to be. Like, it was very, very strange in that sense, because it felt very like suffocating. Like there wasn't an open intellectual climate of, hey, let's talk about this. That's kind of the creepiest part for me. Like, not necessarily even the conclusions or the outcomes. It was just like this the shutting down of the discourse that just is really troubling, because we all know where that leads. I mean, nowhere good.
Yeah.
What we've figured out, though, is that it's not new. One of the things that we do is we're working on this book about fundamental physics, and one of the questions that we have is, how did we come to lose the search for a mechanistic understanding of something like quantum mechanics? We accept that there's weird and spooky things that aren't like the way that the world works on our scale, and we have math that's really, really good at defining and describing what happens at the quantum level. But at some point in the last 100 years or so, we were basically like, we don't need to have a good picture of what's going on down there. It's too weird for us to be able to represent it with material actors.
Gotcha.
And we've been trying to trace back where this came from, how it happened, and it's a super interesting question. But we were talking to this lady, Kathy Joseph, who runs a website, YouTube channel called Kathy Loves Physics. And her interest is historical. And so she came on and we were talking, and we brought up this question to her. And she launched into a story that I'd never heard of before, which was that relativism around World War II and in the decade leading up to it was labeled as the Jewish science by German etherists, I guess is the way that you would put it. So there was basically a school of Germans who believed that we should maintain our relationship to the ether and we should continue to develop this mechanistic understanding. And in their effort to promote that, labeled Einstein and everything else as Jewish science that needed to be stomped out because of obvious Nazi motivations.
Right.
And so I think about that a lot, where how much does the emotional tenor of something like that forever color even a generation later, where none of us know that relativism was labeled as the German science? How much does that still permeate our thinking about physics that prevents us from thinking about it in a mechanistic way? And how often does that happen, where you have something like COVID and somebody starts talking about the lab leak and somebody else is like, that's racist.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, oh, I don't want to be racist. And so you just kind of put it aside and you keep going along your way, because it's a really effective way to get somebody to stop doing something bad, is to be like, well, that's a bad thing. Don't do that bad thing.
Right.
And everybody wants to do the right thing. And so we're motivated by, we're dragged around by our emotions and our desire to be compassionate and good in a way that directly affects our understanding of mechanism. And this goes back to what you were saying about, is it worth looking at the fact that you could identify different skeletons of different races because of what it leads to? And I'm like, I don't know the answer to that question, but my instinct is that it probably is unwise to look away from things that are real because you're worried that somebody's going to do something bad with the knowledge later.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of an example to qualify that, but no, I'm with you on that. Like, I forgot about the Jewish science thing, and that plays into Oppenheimer too. But yeah, it's just whatever the zeitgeist is at the time kind of dictates what's right and wrong in science. And right now I think it's a lot of, very far left or very far right ideology dictates like what you're allowed to say in certain circles and things like that. And it's just not science to me, like yeah, it's difficult. That's a really good example.
It's really scary, like teaching at a university and like being like, I just catch myself being like constantly having to censor myself and be like, oh God, like did what I say just now, or what I'm about to say, is this going to be perceived as, in some extreme political view at the same time, and it's really tricky to like walk that line and not fall into anybody's talking points, because there are there are things that I want to talk about, but I also don't want to just like jump on some party or the other because, I don't really identify with any of those parties either. Very
Right.
tricky.
I got to constantly like, and I was explaining this to my friends the other day. They were like, I think you're a little too worried about how people perceive you. And sure, I think on some level we all are. And I probably have a tendency more than a lot of people. But also, my entire job and livelihood right now depends on me waking up the next morning being canceled or not for saying something that somebody perceived as wrong. So I do have to be extra careful with how I word things. And I kept saying the Levant earlier for that site, and I had posted like it's in Israel, and the international site number is, or whatever it is listed there. It's just what I said in the lecture when I was talking, and of course that gives you all the comments of, you mean Palestine, and it's like it's just such a sensitive issue, and just a little thing like that just nomenclature, which obviously motion's heated on many sides there. It's like, oh crap, I didn't even think about that. And it's just something like that I can say and I imagine as a professor with a job or a lecturer, like that's gotta be scary.
It's
To
super
do that.
scary. Super
Yeah.
scary. It's also like there just doesn't seem to be like much of a culture of redemption, right? It's like it's very hard. It's like hard for people to apologize professionally or just like have it not be a big deal. Like, hey, I didn't mean that. Like, I didn't. Here's what I actually meant. It's like it's it's too late at that point. For most
Yeah.
people, it's like you're gone. So I
Louis
don't know.
C.K.'s bounced back, but I mean
It's
he
true.
didn't say anything wrong. It's just like give it enough time, I guess it's fine. And then I mean not what he did, but just like people are more willing to let him go. Clubs will hire him again and things. But for science, it's like I had a friend tell me on air that evolutionary psychology is misogynistic, and I was like, oh, my bad. And for a while, I just wouldn't think about it. But then I was thinking, we have anxiety because it's supposed to warn you for snakes and predators and stuff, and that like you go into fight or flight mode. So in the modern world, where does that go? It goes to how people perceive you. It goes to money. It goes to all sorts of things. So if that's true, why is other like evolutionary psych stuff not okay to think about? And
Well, because people are worried about what it will do downstream of those conclusions, right? Like, I think about this all the time because I'm a woman in my 30s without children.
sure.
And so, obviously, from an evolutionary standpoint, that there's an entire realm of baggage that comes with being in that position for the first time in history. Because that is not a position that was possible even
Yeah.
2 generations ago, right? I mean, maybe there would be a couple people like me, but not a ton, right?
Mhm.
And so
Ban the witch.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I would definitely, there would be cinders.
Let's see if she floats.
A duck.
I would not. I would sink straight. But like there's a tremendous tension about it, right? Because I spend so much time thinking about what it means to have been born female and what it means about the role that I should play in the world and what it means about the legitimacy that I have for inhabiting intellectual spaces and what it means on the entire trajectory of womankind and womanhood that I stand here, the product of 4 billion years of evolution or whatever. Is like freak beast that's like, nah, I'm good. I don't think I'm gonna continue that. And I think that people really want to shy away from that because it's hard to consider what it means to be the product of that chain and to break the chain because it leaves you with a lot of obligations. And I catch myself too, where I don't know if it's because I was raised this way. Like I was born in the Soviet Union, and then we came over from the Soviet Union here. And my dad he was born in Kazakhstan. He was raised in Chechnya. Jewish kid, Muslim country. His dad died when he was young, and so he's super conservative in the sense that at some point I had to ask him, I was like, and didn't know the answer to this question, and I was like, Dad, do you think it was a mistake to let women vote? And luckily he came down on the fact, he was like, no, of course not. And I was like, but you say feminism is going to destroy all of civilization. And he's like, yeah, but I still think women should vote, So they'll destroy it. It's not that bad. But I'm really good at domestic stuff. Like, I'm really good at cooking and cleaning and like all of these tasks, and I struggle deeply with focus on intellectual flow tasks. And so when you start talking about evolutionary psychology, with that realization, I'm like, holy shit, does that mean that I belong in the kitchen?
Oh, right.
And I'm like, I don't want to, right? I want to be able to choose something else. But then you're also stuck with the fact of like, I'm the only one who can reproduce. If everybody decides what I decide, what happens to the species?
Right.
And so there's a tremendous amount of weight that comes when you start to deal with evolutionary psychology. What do you have something you want to say? What are you smiling about?
I don't know. There's just too much to even unpack there. Yeah, you're always getting in trouble for wanting to play with the boys and stuff too.
Oh God, there's so
We
much
have all
pressure.
these like friends who, I don't even know if it's worth getting into. But a lot of our friends have children, and like the wives, I don't know, they kind of give Nastia a sideways look, like because Nastia always wants to go and play music with us and do all the boy things, and it's I can tell it's rough. It's a rough pickle.
Oh, but my point is that I'm like, these things don't come without baggage. All of science has baggage, especially when you're dealing with the science of humans. And so we are stuck trying to figure out what it means to have a different future given our past for men and for women. And I think that that's the greatest challenge, because people don't want to look too closely at the past, because I think they fear that it will be forced upon them in the future, and they don't want that.
Gotcha. Yeah. Two things to that. The hunter-gatherer thing we'll go to later, but I saw a TED Talk. I don't have kids. I don't really plan to have them right now. That could change if I, one day meet the right person or something. But my friends are all having kids and stuff, and I'm just like, the world is like on fire. Like, why? And like, it's like they can do what they want. But I saw a TED Talk of a woman saying that she wanted to get a hysterectomy because she didn't want to have kids, and she had to go to several doctors because they all were like essentially saying, honey, you're not sure you want that. And like, she was like, it took me several doctors and they refused to let her do it because they were like, well, you'll change your mind one day. And like, that's just so ingrained that women are meant to have children that the doctors would be like, you're not of sound mind. You don't want that. And that made me like sad to like know that. And that's just such an ingrained gender role in Judeo-Christian Western society, I'd say. But also I guess just human society, because like women just have children. I don't know. It's just
it's this inescapable thing that you can't separate out.
It's odd. And then to the hunter-gatherer thing, it's like when you observe ethnographic communities like modern indigenous or Australian or African hunter-gatherer societies, women do a lot of domestic tasks. Men do the hunting, and for the most part. And ethnographic accounts of when the Spanish and the English were exploring here, same, it's corroborated. And when you look in the past, there's really no way to tell in a lot of ways, but you can tell through stone tools some ways. Essentially, it's just like the leading anthropological science, even by feminist anthropologists, is that men did the hunting not because it's like a man thing to do. It's just, it's not practical to bring a child on a bison hunt for 2 weeks. It's safer for a child to be around camp doing domestic things with the mother. But there's also the grandmothering hypothesis where the elderly in the group would take care of the children while the younger people would go out and do things. And it was communalism, taking care of a child. Single mothers with a child is not, one, that's something I wouldn't wish upon anybody, and then two, it's like it's not natural, and like it's very stressful to women apparently. And I can just see it, a single mother in New York City. But anyway, all of that's like anthropological, not fact, but just the consensus that's been around for a while, even by female anthropologists or women anthropologists. And there was an article that went out recently about a female hunter that they found in the Andes, and like it got widespread shared that like this upends anthropological understanding in years of the patriarchy, because like we found a woman hunter. It's like, yeah, they hunted, we know that, like it was something that happened too. It's just not shown in society. And I understand, and I completely was empathetic to like, yeah, like let people know that. But it's just, there's that. And then there's also people don't want to hear that sometimes. And they think everybody was super egalitarian, which they were. And they look at it as if it's men oppressing the women, making them do that stuff. It's just, no, that's just naturally how the division of labor went.
Well,
And
it's a collaboration fundamentally is really, I mean, men and women have been collaborating for what, a million years or something, right? And
yeah,
I think that like just looking at it through the lens of oppression is probably, well, it's just wrong, I think.
sure. And there's many ways where it like probably could be in some areas we just can't tell, but like for the most part, when I've posted about that in like celebration of it, I've gotten, I'd say 70% like thank you for posting this from a lot of women. And then I can tell a lot of people either just had a very emotional reaction to it or didn't finish reading it and were like, this is written from the perspective of a man. You clearly like you're saying women are second to men or like they're just tools for men. And I was like, I'm literally citing like anthropology. Like I don't know what you want from me. And like I empathize and I see why it would come across that way. And they were like, it comes across as women too, was the thing. And I ended it with like history belongs to women too, which is like what I said. And a lot of people said, like, thank you for saying that. But then some people found that to be extremely sexist. And I get it. It's just it's hard for me to touch those subjects, which I find fascinating because of, you know, the implications of it. I don't know where I'm getting with this, but it's just like it's interesting that I have to dance around that kind of stuff, but I'm curious about it. Yeah.
Well, it's unfortunate because you want to be able to operate in the world and just pursue the things that you're curious about. But people get so angry
Yeah.
and mean.
Very.
Like, somebody the other day, I think it called me like an absolutely stupid woman, clueless woman.
Wow.
It was like a channel with 2 million subscribers and like edited some stuff that I said and was just like, look at how stupid she is. And I'm like, that's a weird.
It was actually a really brilliant thing she said too, which is like what made it even more perplexing. I was like, did you even hear what she said? Anyways.
It was a conversation we were talking about the origin of life, and from a biology background, I'm kind of like, I think that we look at life as this object, but I think that it's actually like a state of matter. And I have an entire philosophy that I won't go into about why I think that life
I'd agree with that.
I feel like it's intuitively the way that makes everything make sense, but that's besides the point. My point was that when you start to say things on the internet and you start to get a big enough audience that people are actually listening to you, there's a really weird and scary point where you come up against the fact that people are going to be really mean.
Uh-huh.
And I think that you just have to find a way to get through that, because the alternative is to stop doing something that you care about. And that isn't fair. Like, the shrieking harpies shouldn't get their way. I think that that's really important for all of us that are out here coming up with ideas and working things out in public. It's like they can't have it.
I'm glad you said that, because I wanted to ask you guys about thinking later, but the way I think, I say and think a lot sometimes because I'm trying to formulate what I'm going to say, but I really formulate thoughts by talking them out and like just talking and having a conversation. And what I say might be like, for example, like, okay, there's more white people than black people in the United States, so disproportionately, or like proportionate, more white people are killed by police than black people. That gets clipped, and then it's said that I'm that, or like a friend will be like, no, but I'm about to say after that, but it's disproportionate to the black population, and because it's smaller, and like I just think that way, and I need to be much better at formulating a thought in my head and sitting in an awkward silence for a second before I say something. But as somebody who podcasts all the time or is interviewed and then I talk, it's very dangerous for me sometimes to like just formulate thoughts, especially when I'm trying to look at one side then the other to come to a conclusion, if that makes sense. And I forget what you just said that I was agreeing with how you phrased it, but yes, like talking it out is wrong sometimes to people and bothers me. Yeah.
And I think that it
And at
should.
the same time, it's like the most engaging way, I think, to encounter new ideas is to see somebody wrestling with it. I really believe that. Like I'll often go to the lectures that I give, and I'll sort of have like some sort of some question I have in my mind that I don't know the answer to at the beginning, and by working it out and maybe even involving the audience and really like seeing what, because you can feel when something, that's the cool thing about speaking to groups of people, is like you
Yeah.
can feel when you're like off the path. Like there's something like almost like supernatural about it. I don't know if it's just people's eyeballs staring at you or whatever, but you can kind of feel when people's attention's drifting. Like you can tell when you're actually like tracking down something towards understanding what's going on with any particular topic. And there's
Yeah.
like something profound about that, and I think it really resonates with people. So I wouldn't stop doing that. I mean, if you want to just get it over with, I think that a really useful mechanism is just say the offensive thing up front. Just be like, I'm going to say something, announce it. I'm going to say something really offensive, but hear me out, and just say it and then unpack it, you know? And because you kind of cut people off at the legs that way. It's like, I know this sounds horrible, but hold on, it's not, and you're going to find out why. And then just go ahead and unpack it.
That's a good way to look at it. I'll practice that now, because it's something like I have nightmares, not nightmares, but like I'll lay in bed at night and be like, man, I hope they didn't construe that as bad when I say something. But it's when you say that too. Comedy, like I do stand up, and I apply it to lecturing a lot too. Like I work on like lecturing stuff, doing stand up, like just try to making it funny, and then I can put that into a lecture or a video. Louis C.K. said this very well. The audience is your barometer for how you're doing. Well, not your barometer, your instrument. Like it's the only form of art where like you play them, and there's nights where I'll do the same exact set and it kills. And then there's another night where it's the same exact set, but the audience is like dead. So therefore the next jokes don't work because there's just no energy. And it's the same thing when I'm lecturing. I can tell when people are like glossed over, but if I'm being engaging, it's a fun point, or I'm like being funny with it, I can see the eyes on me that are like, okay, this is working. And then laughs help. And it's very interesting how that works. Like the way you phrase that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really profound. We do music too. It's the exact same thing, you know, because
Okay.
you can play the same song. It's like 2 different nights, and it's like it really just has to. You really have to grab a hold of the audience, you know, like really each person in the room, and even, you know, with small rooms, it's like you need to make sure that you're connecting somehow. And I think it can lead you, like as an artist or as a like orator or whatever it is that you do,
Mhm.
towards the right path if you pay attention to that. It's
Yeah.
like you can really feel like it's tangible, like what grips people. Comedy scares the shit out of me. I can't imagine just getting up on stage and trying to just make people laugh. It's like honestly like that and MMA, I'm just kind of like in awe of. I'm like I can't imagine doing
I
those
didn't about
things.
that.
It's just
Yeah. Music for me too. I play lots of instruments. I cannot play for people. It's just something I can't describe it. It's like I feel naked if I play for people, but I can do stand up just fine. And if I bomb, like I bomb. And like it's funny because a night when you do well, it's this euphoric feeling of okay, I'm funny, I did that, like I'm good at this, I love this. And then when you bomb, like I used to take it like, oh no, I'll never do this again. But now it's just like I need to come up with a better strategy next time. If the audience is dead, maybe don't use that joke, go to this one. And I don't
mm,
take it as personally. But the feeling is like, ooh. Like when
yeah.
you're in the middle of it and you're like, all right, maybe I won't go with that JK Rowling joke. And then um
Do you tape
but yeah, I
yourself?
imagine it's the same for music. Huh?
Do you tape yourself when you perform? Like listen back to your performance and stuff?
Occasionally, like if a friend's there, I'll have them record it, but I try not to record every one of them because it's just hard to hear yourself a lot. And like
Yeah,
to,
yeah.
especially if it's not great. Um, and I would post more of it too. It's just not relevant to my uh like niche, I guess. And people might find it offensive, like what I'm talking about. So I don't. But
I guess just
I
like
enjoy
for your own, like you can maybe like when you listen to these things played back, you can kind of get a sense of like, oh, that's where that went wrong or something like that.
Oh,
It's like
okay.
I noticed this with music and even with the lecture. I don't really listen to my lectures, but sometimes I do when I go back to prepare for the next year. I like listening and I can tell like points where like that's where I lost some attention. You know, you can perceive it by hearing yourself played back, and it like tells you how not to go off the path the next time. I think it's really useful. It is painful for sure, especially if you
Yeah.
bomb, right? Especially if you bomb, right? But
Yeah.
it's really worth doing, I think, at the same time.
This is a tactic that athletes and stuff use all the time, right? Where it's you watch a video of your performance in order to be able to troubleshoot what happened. It is really difficult to watch though.
Yeah. I imagine sports too, like especially if you really wanted to win that race or something. But and then MMA too. Like I guess you guys brought that up. Like it's technical, and you're like, oh, I messed up there, kind of thing. But it would be hard to watch, and you're getting hit in the face because you made that technical mistake. So
But I find it hard to believe that you could remember the technical mistake that you made while getting punched in the face. And so the only way that you'll be able to figure out what it is that went wrong is
to
by,
rewatch it.
right? Because it's just, when we play music, it happens so fast and it's over and you're on the other side of it and you're like, that felt good. Or it felt amazing and there's no memory of the specifics of what happened.
Yeah,
Right.
even for the amazing stuff, like if like people are laughing really hard, right? It's probably worth mining and being like, well, what is it? What was it that time that got them, you know? Or the same
Mhm.
thing with, you might be like, oh man, we nailed that song tonight, but like, what was it? What was it about it? And you can listen back and hear, you know, some things that you might be able to put into place next time. Because if you think about like what really separates like the super athletes or the like comedians or the super musicians from the pack, it's like they're reliable. Like they can do that same trick not every once in a while, but it's like every night they're just killing because they've
Yep.
like dialed it in. They've cut all the
Chaff, all the
nonsense out.
chaff is
Yeah.
gone, yeah.
And I think that like analyzing yourself, as painful as it is like really critical in moving up that chain pretty much.
Well, because so much of what we do and appreciate has to do with visual presentation. The look on somebody's face, the way that they
Mhm.
carry their body. I walked in the other day and Shiloh was watching a concert, Sting and the Police at Glastonbury in like the 70s. And you watch them perform, and there's something about their faces and the way that they move and the comfort that they have that makes you sink into the performance. I remember watching a performance of David Bowie on stage one time, and they're all having such a good time. They radiate joy, and it makes you want to get deeper into the music. But I'll
Mhm.
watch musicians on stage that don't seem like they're having that good of a time.
Just technical.
Yeah, and it's
Even if they're playing all the right notes, like if there's nothing wrong, you know, it could be like decent music, but there's something about like that just caving into themselves that just kills it for people.
We actually, when we started this podcast, we did it as we made these giant puppets and we would puppet the interviews. So we would sit off camera and on camera would be the puppets.
I
Be-
would not have guessed that at all.
We were terrified of putting our faces on it,
Oh, okay.
of just going on record as having weird ideas about science and being on camera and being personalities.
They're like, you can't cancel alien puppets, so. But it was impossible. Yeah, we just couldn't. You can't make eye contact. You can't read. People can't read your face. Like it's just, yeah.
Everybody thought it was a
people
children's show. We
Yeah.
kept we would try to have the same level of conversation that we're having here, but with alien puppets, and everybody was like, "This is a children's show, right?" And we
Lab leak.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's
So
funny.
it was a disaster, but it took a long time of actually being on camera before it started to be something comfortable. I imagine it was the same for you when you started your YouTube stuff.
Yeah, the hardest part is editing because I have to hear your voice over and over, which you get accustomed to. It's just when I'm trying to like cut out like an somewhere or I'm trying to edit a certain part, I have to keep hearing like when you say the same word over and over again, it just becomes like Germanic. I'm doing that with the thing, and I'm like, what am I even editing here? And then you have to occasionally you'll pause, and your face is like in the frame, and that kind of stuff. But you get over it. But it does make me like I want to look presentable. I'll get my hair cut or get like a barber and stuff, and like I don't like having to worry about that kind of stuff. And it's not that I worry about it. I just want to look back on the video and be like, I didn't look like a bum that day. Like it's good, and I just feel more confident. Like if I've, what's the word? Kempt, I guess is the word. And yeah, you get used to being on camera, but another time, like if someone's recording me and I'm slouched and wearing like a t-shirt and I'll realize there's a stain on it, like I don't care. It's just like, which is very common for me. I imagine it's the same for you guys. Like you just stop caring after a while. But
There's something.
Or we started caring more or something too. Man, our first podcasts are pretty bad. Like we left them up though, because I think it's like edifying. Because I want to be like really good at this 10 years from now, and I want people to be able to look back and see like how we didn't start off really good at it. I think that's like really good for people, especially people who want to be podcasters or do these kind of things, to like realize that like everybody comes from nothing basically, and so I don't know. I think there's something really valuable in that. I don't know. I've been like I go back and watch like some of the like the greatest all-time MMA fighters of all time. You watch their first fights and stuff, like they suck. They're horrible. But it's like there's something so valuable and inspiring about that too. It's like you can really you can change yourself if you work at it.
Yeah.
And I think that there's something really valuable about taking care of yourself, and not in a way that's vain, but just in a way, I was a nerdy kid in high school and I was not well liked. And I had my group of friends and we were very tight, but we were definitely the like hardcore uber nerds with chips on our shoulders.
Okay.
And then I went back and I did substitute teaching in high school. And I was amazed because I saw the popular kids and I immediately understood why they were popular. They were well-groomed, they would stand up straight, they were socially competent, they never looked anxious or worried. They just radiated this vibe of, I've got this. And then you look at the kids that are unpopular and they're all kind of like scrunched into themselves and they're just, unwashed masses of just like nerdy little kids. And it really struck me how there's this feedback loop between the two, where you can transition from being at the lowest end of the totem pole to being somewhere that's, I don't know that you can get to like the top of the person who's like the best at throwing the ball into the tiny little hoop. But I think that there is a place where you can slowly work your way up the hierarchy, and there is value to that because it feels good to not be at the lowest part of the totem pole.
Yes, very much so. I wouldn't say I was unpopular. I wouldn't say I was popular. Like my friend group was. It's funny because I have international friends that always ask me like, "What's high school like?" Because they see the movies and stuff. And like, I wasn't a jock. I wasn't like popular kid table or whatever. But my friends and I we were just a group of friends that everyone hung out with and dated other people. We were chill. But where was I going with that? It wasn't until, and like in that group, I never felt like I belonged anywhere else. It was weird, but I had to get, here's where I was going with it. I was always nerdy in the same sense. Like I liked the stuff that I was talking about, but I went to high school in Nashville, couldn't really talk about or didn't learn about like Australopithecines and stone tools all the time, and dogs and stuff. But the more I got into school, the more I like leaned into, okay, I'm smart. I like this kind of stuff. I like talking about it. Gave me confidence. And then whether that coincided with me realizing I had an anxiety thing and like growing out of that, or like that helped me grow out of that, I can't tell, chicken or the egg thing. But yes, it definitely, confidence seeps into everything else in your life. You just feel better throughout the day when you're confident. And it's interesting you noticed that in high school too, because I'm wondering now, I was worried about what I looked like because I was a teenager, hormonal and like self-conscious. But if I just came in thinking I looked good, like maybe I would have had a better day. I don't know.
Yeah, I was really interested. I was surprised by how clear it was. Did you have that same experience?
I didn't really pay attention to it. Yeah, for whatever reason. Yeah, I don't know.
It does. You brought up primate behavior before too, and like everything's kind of like a chimp empire. But someone told me like if a guy is interested in a woman, like he'll usually put his chest out more. Like I don't know if those things are true, but I do look for them, and I have noticed like if you're just sitting there like 2 drinks in at a bar and your friend goes to the bathroom and you're just people watching for a second, like we're literally all just apes.
Oh yeah,
It's funny and like you're
dude.
showing your
The apes
more.
when the alphas they're when they become the alpha or whatever they call it. I don't know. That's a different word in ape culture, but like the chimps, the dominant male, their hair changes when they assume that role, and
Yeah,
they literally like their appearance changes. Like their hair kind of stands up taller, and they just look physically different. It's really wild. And then as soon as
orangutans
they're
get
defeated,
the big thing around their face. Sorry.
oh, same thing. Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
physical changes. It's kind of wild, actually. I
Yeah.
wonder how much of that plays out in humans too.
Because that'll be what, epigenetic or phenotypical? I don't know what that would be.
It can't even be genetic. I don't know, man.
It
It's
could
got to
be
be like,
epigenetic.
I mean, the hair follicles are controlled by nerves, so there's like some sort of conscious input into it that's reinforced by the society.
Well, the conscious input could be along the lines of when you have a specific amount of a certain hormone,
Mhm.
it causes gene expression changes in the signaling of a specific subset of neurons, which then leads your hair to stand on differently. And the way that you test that is you inject them with said hormone to see if it gave the same effect.
I think it's hormonal for sure, but I wonder how much of that plays out in human beings as well, and how much you can take control of too. I mean, that's the other funny thing is like con men, right? Like confidence men, they like make their entire living based on just exuding that sort of confidence, for lack of a better word, right?
Yeah.
It's like, and that works. Like people will buy stuff that's complete nonsense if someone presents it to them with the utmost confidence. If they're really well groomed, nice like Armani suits, you know, it's
Right.
it's a notorious profession, really. So it can go too far.
Yeah. And I guess if it's a hormonal thing, you're radiating it. That or just somebody who's confident seems healthy, or I don't know. It's just something, not to get like evolutionary with it, but yeah, just there's something there. That's
I-
interesting.
I think the health has a lot to do with it because that's something that I noticed with the popular kids in the high schools that they looked really healthy. They look healthier than the unpopular kids.
Huh.
And I think that I don't know if they are or they aren't. Like, I don't know if they're eating better or whatever, but if they have like a more nurturing environment or if things are more stable for them or there's some sort of foundational basis that allows them to be so. I think that there probably is an evolutionary basis of it because I used to think that it was dumb and shallow, right? So I'm like an immigrant kid. I don't come from America. My parents aren't into any of the American things. And so the easiest way to turn around on that is to be like, well, the American ways are stupid.
Mhm.
And then I kind of came away from it and I thought about it differently and realized that I think that there's something meaningful there in the hierarchy where there is a true signal that is being sent out and perceived that results in, the abject angst of many, many teenagers. But
Do you
starts from
think?
something real.
Oh, sorry. Not to ask you if you found the kids attractive. That's a weird way to phrase this, but like, were the kids that were the popular kids? Did they seem to be like? I guess what I'm asking is like, is it being attractive inherently genetically that makes you feel that confident, or was it just genuinely they just looked healthy and clean?
They look like statues come to life. Like there's you run into people like this. There's like one kid in one of my there's actually a couple kids in my classes now that are kind of like that where you see them and you're just like you're a genetic anomaly.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Right?
Yeah.
You just run into people and you're like that's crazy that you look like that. Congratulations.
In terms of like good looking, or in terms of just unique like features?
In the sense of just like fine skin, like no blemishes, no wrinkles, like their teeth are
Gotcha.
even and clean. The way that they hold themselves is clean. They've figured out their grooming rituals, so all of their grooming is tied together.
Gotcha.
right? It's like, it's just, you look at a person, you're like, you're really well groomed, you know how to hold your body, and it just gives off a vibe of something that is kind of otherworldly. And you can see the way that other students orbit them too, where you can see the effect that it has on everybody else, because it's almost, I think of, did you ever read The Fountainhead? It's an
No.
Ayn Rand book. There's this character in it
Oh.
called Howard Rourke. And Howard Rourke is described as this kind of, it's almost like a statue come to life. He's very handsome, he's very upstanding, he knows what he wants, he's very determined. And all of the other downstream philosophy of Ayn Rand you can do with whatever you want, but they seem like those kids. And it's maybe something that I can see because Ayn Rand was from the Soviet Union too, and I wonder if it's something that you see when you come from a place where that hierarchy is supposed to be eradicated. And then you come to America, and America is a place that celebrates the hierarchy. And so as somebody I grew up here, so it's been for a long time, but my family's really insular.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if I see something that kind of is lost in the shuffle of American life that other people don't see.
That's really interesting.
Because I think that somebody can be attractive without being on the top of a dominance hierarchy. But you see people that are just maxing out on all of their charismatic features.
Yeah, I don't think that it's purely biological, because there's a lot of hot band nerds, right? Like, you just wouldn't
Right.
notice it at first, right? It's just something about, it's literally like a social adjustment of how you carry yourself and present yourself and things like that.
Yeah, because it doesn't always have to be, like when I was in high school, it wasn't always the popular kid group that was there were very attractive girls in my mind that were like not in that group still, and like like in the band, or they just kept to themselves kind of thing, which I always kind of found. I just find quiet people attractive sometimes because you can tell they're thinking, but yeah, you don't have to be like outwardly, a textbook specimen of an attractive human. Like it can be other ways too, which took me a while to learn. Like for myself, I should say. Yeah.
I totally agree with that. And I think attraction and the substance of it is mysterious and ethereal. What I was just struck by is that it's not all of the popular kids. It's just seeing some individual characters. Like I can see them in my mind's eye still, where it's just someone who seems to move the room around them. And you run into people like that when you're an adult too, somebody who's just a force of nature.
Mm-hmm.
And those people tend to be of a specific appearance, I think.
As in, like when that person walks into a room, like you can tell, like everyone stops to listen to that person, or like
it just kind of rearranges around them. Like I'm gonna put Shiloh on the
it's
spot here.
more-
I think Shiloh is like that. Like Shiloh walks into a room. I'm serious. Like I saw him from across the room, and I was like, I will have that man in my life. And
on.
now 10 years on, we're married. But it's like I see it where you walk into a room, and there's something about the way that you carry yourself. I think you just.
But like Nate's like that too, right?
Our friend Nate, yeah, like he helped us organize a show in San Francisco, and then while we were on stage, he walked into the room, and the man dresses like what would you call it? Like a
Like a Wild West like folk singer or something. I don't know, like Bob Dylan or something.
Yeah. And so he walks into a room, and it's so consistent and it's so perfectly executed. It's the ultimate expression of the form. And he walks into a room, and the room rearranges around the fact that somebody has walked in that has a clear identity and artistry about the way that they have constructed who they are. And he doesn't ever it's not a costume. He never takes it off.
But it's not like physical necessarily in Nate's case, right? That's what I'm trying to get at. It's like it's really something that he's cultivated. I mean, he's somebody who's deeply competent. He was a professional skateboarder before he was a musician. He's just really good at stuff that he does, and I think that's what gives him that confidence to walk into the room like that. But
yeah, it just has like a presence.
yeah.
Yeah. And it's fascinating to me because that's stuff that you can understand without words.
Like everyone knows it somehow.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's weird, and I don't know if it's possible to move into that space or not.
Definitely is, I think.
Interesting.
It's implicit and tacit culture in anthropology. That implicit culture is like you walk into a place and it says mask required. We all know that, okay, we got to wear a mask. But tacit culture is when you walk by somebody that you normally would say hi to and like kind of smile. How do you do that now? And like it's the unspoken things. So with that too, it's just kind of like it might be more biological, but it's an unspoken thing that doesn't have, a sign for it. It's just something we all kind of understand. And I think that's cross cultural because like when I was in where was I? It was London or it was Tel Aviv, like it just people that were that's an attractive person, like a man or a woman in my mind. I mean I'm straight, but like yeah, you could just they just the way they hold them, it's just something I can't explain. Yeah. Where was I?
And the dogs know it too, right? The dogs, right? Animals
Yeah.
know this stuff better than anybody else. It's interesting.
I think it's fascinating that like I always thought it was like a wives' tale that dogs were a judge of character kind of thing. But my dogs only growled at like a few people, and those people usually have like pissed me off in some way or like made me anxious in a way at some point. And like my dog read that, which I thought was interesting.
That's fascinating.
Before I did. Yeah.
Hmm.
And he just is in sync with me, but also sometimes I can tell he's anxious because I am. And like the less anxious I got, the less he was. It's just it and there's definitely chemical exchange between humans and dogs. Like it's just that's science. And there was a cool study. I can't name you what it was called or who wrote it, but they gave it was humans in a room watching a horror movie and humans in a room watching like I think it was like a Disney movie. And they collected their sweat and then they gave the dog like the test tube of the sweat held out to the dog, and when the person who had watched the horror movie their sweat, the dog put its tail behind its legs and kind of like went back, but the people that watched the Disney movie it started wagging its tail and it was happy.
Whoa.
So when they sniff for cancer and things like that, they legitimately can smell a hormonal change in a person, which is wild to
It
me.
is wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are they picking up on? I wonder what that's like to perceive the world in terms of smells.
That it's kind of I wanted to get into this too. Like you mentioned the mind's eye thing. I want to come back to that. But the a dog, like I explain this. We're sapiocentric. Like we view the world through like a human lens. We have parallax eyes, stereoscopic vision. That's how we absorb the world. Dogs and cats, it's smell. Like they can see, but when I'm in the woods with my dog, I will see him stop, pick up, and like, because deer poop came by in the wind. I didn't see the deer whatsoever, but he did it. That's how he sees the world. But I can see a deer before the wind hits him, and he can smell it, so he can't see it. So there's like that connection with humans and dogs is cool to me, but also just like they can see sense. I can't describe it in any way. It's just it's cool to think of to go back to consciousness too, how another animal perceives the world through that sense versus this sense. It's we can't wrap our head around it. Yeah.
Yeah, like if dogs had language, it would almost necessarily be different than ours because like everything, like we say we had a brilliant idea or I see what you're saying or it's clear to me. Like they're all visual analogies that we use in terms of recognition. Yeah. And I imagine a dog would have a very different take on that.
I smelled
For sure.
the answer.
Yeah, 100%.
I smell what you're putting down. Yeah. It's like
Yeah.
I learned recently that I've always had trouble processing things when people talk to me. Like I store things as data. Like I kind of describe it as like an Excel file. And I had this problem. I had an ex, and we were talking. We're friends now, are still. But she would explain her day, and she was saying, we drove the Jeep to this canyon. We descended down to go look at these petroglyphs. We had the recorder. The Jeep was here. We went like a half hour this way down this road. And then she would be like, are you listening to me? And I was like, yeah, I'm listening. And then she's like, do you see what I mean? And I was like, no, sorry, I just can't. So where was the Jeep? And I later learned that year that there's something called aphantasia, which is where some people don't have a mind's eye. And I did the test for that. I mean, it's just like, close your eyes, think of an apple. Can you see it? No, I cannot. And I thought my whole life, like, well, to go back to that story, I was hearing what she was saying, but she was so visual describing it, it was too much information for me, and I couldn't follow. So my whole life, like counting sheep, or like I see what you mean, or like, and a therapist was like, picture yourself on a beach, how do you feel? And I was like, I don't know. Like I couldn't figure it out. And then in middle school, I failed a math class, and I felt dumb, obviously, but like I tried my best. But she taught math in a way that was like, okay, factor it in your head, like do this, and I could not. Um, so then I'll stop ranting here in a second, but it just made me think about one, how other animals perceive the world so differently, but two, like children that grow up in an inner city school, like that's already underfunded and stuff, and they're taught with a specific, textbook way of teaching and like the curriculums and stuff, like they're never going to thrive if they aren't taught in a way that they think correctly. And once I learned I was not a visual learner, I would have people be like, can you draw that for me? Or can you express that to me differently? And it made my communication so much clearer, especially interpersonally. But that I have a whole thing about that with like cave art and stuff, but I don't know. Have you guys ever encountered that?
I have a thing where I cannot understand stories if the references of subjects aren't super exact. Like Shiley will be saying something, and there was the other night he was telling me a story, and there were 3 people in the story, all dudes, and he kept saying he.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, I have no idea how to follow this story, even though I think that if I was a different person, I probably could have, because the context in which he was used was sufficient to be able to trace it onto which he was in the motion. But I'm absolutely incapable of following when there's non-reference pronouns, to the degree that I constantly have to be stopping people to be like, wait, what? What does that mean? What are you talking about here? And if I do that, I can follow it. But I think that I'm definitely more along the lines of draw me a picture. And then once you have the picture down, then I know that you know what you mean. And then I can hold it in my hands and I can manipulate it in a way that's easier for me than when it's just all locked up inside my head.
Yeah, for sure.
Like when I think through ideas, I have to write them out. Like we're writing this book right now, and I'm like writing stuff out and then deleting entire pages because I'm like, okay, I've worked it out, and now it's a sentence.
That too. Yeah.
Which is like exhausting.
Cool. Yeah, and like I would have, I think it was the same partner, another partner. We had a debate about, do owls eat squirrels? Because I had an owl in my backyard, and she was like, yeah, they definitely do. And I had to look it up, and she said like, why don't you just believe me? And I was like, I genuinely believe you. I just for some reason had to see the Wikipedia sentence where it said so for it to like stick in my head. And I felt bad because it was like I didn't want to like invalidate what she was saying. It's just once I realized that, like it logs as data in my head that I'm like, okay, it's not an ambiguous thing to me now.
I will constantly tell Shiloh things, and I will see that it doesn't fully process, and then a week or a month or 6 months later, he'll be like, this dude on this podcast said this thing, and I'm like, I told you that 6 months ago.
You do the same thing.
Of course, everybody does, but it's really funny to watch it because I feel like you have to see these things come at you from multiple different directions, multiple different times, and it has to be the right person at the right moment to get the thing to stick. And I find it to be really, really funny because it's just so, it just exposes the fragile and unpredictable way that the mind works.
Yeah.
It's just such a mystery.
It blew my mind because I didn't realize people. The guy who makes my art for me for my Instagram and videos, he said he can like step into like the world he's painting, manipulate it in like 3D, change the shading, change the lighting, change the grass color and stuff, which is something that is foreign to me. I cannot do that. But he said because of that, every time when he sends me something, I'm like, dude, that's amazing. He always feels that it's not good enough because it's not as good as the 4K image in his head that he had. And I imagine a lot of artists struggle with that too, that it's not right. But for me, if I make art or like I built that cave wall that I used in a lot of my skits, I had no idea what I was doing. I was like, I'll get the foam, I'll carve it with the knife, and I'll paint it like a certain color. My friends were like, "You're never gonna finish that. Like, what are you doing?" And they usually are very right about that. I don't. But in this one, I just had to build it with my hands to see it because I couldn't see it. And I wonder if art comes from that a lot too. But to that extent, 30 or 50,000 years ago, cave art booms all over the world. Like it, especially in Europe and Asia. There's older stuff in places, but I was wondering, and that's right about when the anatomically to behaviorally modern human thing starts. Is it that people then were able to process an image in their head and were like, oh, I need to paint that and draw it? Or did we always have that? Because when I flint knap, people will tell me like picture what you want inside the rock and then shape it around that. And I was like, okay, I can't do that. And I didn't realize that at first. So now I take a pencil and draw the shape that I want, and I can flint knap way better just because I have that reference there. So I just wonder if that is a vestigial thing, like mine's vestigial and a mind's eye is not. And I don't know if there's a way to test that. It's just weird.
Yeah, I think that's like also like the really rewarding part about doing art is that when you start off, you do suck at it, and it's like very hard to make that thing in your head happen. But as you like toil for years and years and years, eventually you can gain some confidence that you will be able to make it happen. And I think that like the absolute masters of the art world or comedy or sports or anything, they've gotten to that point where they have that knowledge that they can make it happen. And it's very satisfying, of course, to make it happen. Even if you might not ever reach it 100%, they know that they can get 99% of the way there, and that's got to be good enough, and they move on. And so I think that like I wish everybody did some sort of art because I think it can teach you a lot about believing in your ability to make something happen by putting the work into it. You know?
Yeah. And then there's like, I mean, playing football very well could be art. And like, that turns into an abstract thing too, which is another unique thing about it.
For sure. Yeah, sports are incredibly artistic at the highest, especially at the highest levels. It's just like magic, essentially.
Yeah, I nerded out the other day. I watched Ahsoka. I love Star Wars, but just the choreography Rosario Dawson did to like make the character like. I was just blown away by it. I had to stop and like rewind because that probably took weeks of practice to do that, unless it was CGI. And my friend was like, "All right, can we just keep watching it?" Yeah, sure. But I just appreciate art, and there's that Japanese phrase. I don't know what it is, where you just like practice something every day to get really good at it. But yeah, so I'm assuming it's that way for music with you guys.
And man, yeah, I don't know. It's like I used to wonder like how people actually survived without music because it's just always been something like no matter like what goes wrong in my life or whatever, I always know that I can always get better at music. Like, and I can always get myself closer to that satisfied feeling of, this piece is actually what I meant it to be. And there's like just something so like cosmically comforting about that progression towards actually being able to do something. I don't know. I still have struggle understanding how people can get by without it in some sense. Because it's just so fundamentally comforting to me.
Yeah. What do you play?
All kinds of stuff. But
Okay.
I'll try to like learn new instruments too for this, just to get more of that sensation. And I mostly do like well, I don't know. I played in all kinds of bands, played all kinds of instruments, and I just always been recording. Been like got like a little tape machine when I was, a teenager, and just always been trying to make records and that kind of thing. So just
Yeah.
trying to figure out, like, because you hear these records, like on the radio or whatever when you're a kid, and you're like, and then you get a tape machine or something, and you're just like, oh my god, like this sounds horrible compared to like, this CD or whatever. And just figuring out how to do that and just being able to turn that magic trick into something that's actually real is, I don't know, it's really just made me feel in control of my own universe in a way that I don't know that anything else would. But I'm sure it's the same for somebody who does sports or dance or anything really that requires intense mastery of some skill.
Yeah.
It's like just that daily progression, just a little bit further every day. Each piece a little bit. Try to just do something you couldn't do before.
Mhm.
It's like,
Yeah. It's just getting what's in your head out in a way to communicate it to somebody, or like to see it in it. I don't know. I don't know how to describe that. It's interesting.
Well, it gets frozen in, it gets you to a place where you can look at it from the outside. Right? Because while it's in your head, it's just in your head, and it's this inchoate thing that might be good, might not be good, but it's not formulated well enough to be able to actually see in the world. But when you finish something, the act of finishing is a transition that allows you to then turn around and examine it, no longer being inside of it. And I think that that's the only way to actually be able to progress, right? Like if we had a bunch of conversations and then we never released them and they just lived on a hard drive somewhere, would we get better at them? I don't know, because I think that there's something about finishing it, editing it, assembling it, putting it out. Like, our set looks different. The way that we dress is different. Our camera setups are all different. And that comes from looking at a finished product and being like, Jesus Christ, that looks like shit. Like, that looks
Yeah.
awful. Like, we did our best and it sucked. And then you're like, we got to do better. And there's just a progressive.
yeah, like I've really embraced just sucking at stuff. I think it's just so good. Like people should just be like all for being terrible at things, because like that's the way you get started, And it seems cliche, but it's just so important to be okay with being bad at something that you've not done a lot of. Because
Yeah.
like that's the only way forward. And so you just gotta like, that's why I'm like, I'm gonna leave these terrible podcasts up forever too. The same thing I was saying before. I'm like, it's really like people gotta see that stuff. I gotta see it. Like I wanna remember like how bad it was at some point.
Yeah.
Same with all my old musics out there. Some of it's terrible, I wouldn't force someone to listen to some of that stuff, But it's
Mhm.
like, it's good. It's good that it's there. It's good that that's how it happens. It's not
Yeah.
just some magic that just like appears out of nowhere.
Like, Louis C.K. is really, really, really funny. Like, he's
Yeah.
really good at what he does. He was not when he was 20. If you go back and you look at early Louis C.K.,
Yeah.
he sucked. He bombed. He was awkward. He didn't know how
Yeah.
to time things. His jokes weren't well formulated. And it's incredible to see him suck and to know that that man got up on stage time and time again and just blew it.
Dude, it's so valuable.
Yeah.
Sometimes I meet like other musicians and they're like, oh, what kind of stuff are you listening to right now? And I'm like, you probably don't want to know, because like I'm trying to find like the oldest, shittiest stuff by the best people that I love, and like really study like what was that leap that they made, like what did they see in themselves that they brought out, and what did they cut away? And it's like that's just the most fascinating art for me, is like seeing an artist across their whole career and like how they actually honed into what was working and what wasn't. It's so unendingly fascinating to me. I'm like, I could kind of care less for the finished product now that they're like super famous and done these incredible works. I'm like, yeah, that stuff's cool, but it's like, how did they get there? That's what's so fascinating to me.
Because
Yeah.
the final. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
I was just going to say the final product is kind of like a magic trick. It looks, when somebody's really good at it, it looks
Yeah.
effortless. It's like, how
did they do that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I was always way more interested in watching the like behind the magician than I
Right.
was in just watching the magic show. I'm like, okay, so David Copperfield can make like pigeons come out of his ass. Like, great. Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, how did he do that? Where did he put the pigeon? And that I think is the cool thing about finishing something, because you can do it for yourself. Like, without finishing it, I don't think that you can ever do it. And without putting it in front of people, you can never get to the next stage either, because you don't want to do it for other people. Like, I don't think that that's the point of making stuff. And yet, there's a crazy chemistry that happens when you finish something and you set it down on the table and you're like, look at it.
Yep. Yeah. If I make a post that took me a while to edit or think about, like, usually comes to me in the shower, or like if I'm cooking, sometimes taking a shit, and like I'll sit there and I'm like, okay, this is good. I'll formulate it, post it, and then my main thing too is I try not to stick with the same style every time I make a video. Like I like doing it differently because I don't want to just churn out stuff. Um, when I get comments that are like, I loved this, or like the way you did this, or like great teacher, like it just, I shouldn't let that stuff like drive my self-esteem, which I don't do anymore, I don't think, but it does tell me that, okay, that style was good. Maybe start thinking of the next video in that kind of sense too, because people liked it. And I do like that about social media in that sense, because people will tell you what they think.
100%.
Yeah, but for um music, I love listening to acoustic covers of like artists' songs, and then listening to other people cover their songs. But the acoustic cover to me is like what they originally intended the song to sound like and how it feels to them, stripped down into its form. And I love that the most. And then other people's covers of things. But uh, yeah, it's just like the interpretations of the song, because you don't always know what was behind the lyrics or what was behind what mood they're feeling to make that song. But like to another person's interpretation of how they felt about the song is always really cool to me. So the whole joke about like you're afraid to give the aux cord to somebody, like you're listening to artists' old stuff. Like I'm listening to 30-year-old, or not 30, 3-year-old covers of like an old Shakira song that's acoustic, and like I'm not trying to share that with people, but I like it.
No,
Yeah.
I think that's where you get like the genuine. Actually, that's the funniest thing is like sometimes I'll spend like months or weeks, let's say, trying to like get a really good composition and recording, get all the instruments and everything. But the hardest part that I'll spend the most amount of time on is like just what you just said, like the song itself, like the 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 very stripped down bare beast of it. That's the hardest part for sure. And that's kind
Like
of
what it is at its core.
yeah. And I'll just like change that around and change that around and change that around until I got something that like I could just release this as an acoustic song, but I'm like, now I'll have fun with it and like actually orchestrate it and do all this other stuff. But I think that's really gets at the heart of it. I love seeing like like really famous painters like sketchbooks too, or like yeah, just really stripped down, almost like just get into the very instant of creation, because that's where the magic happens.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys follow my Instagram or not, but like it's a um not a meme, but like I really respect Shakira as an artist. Like it's just fun, and I learned Spanish. The reason I got into her was in high school. My teacher was like, watch Telemundo, watch what's the other one, Univision, or listen to music, and Shakira was the name I knew. But I listened to her whole discography, and then I watched her. That was like what, 2007, and to where she's at now. All of her stuff was poetry she wrote as a kid. And she would sing. People told her she sounded like a goat, which isn't inaccurate, but it didn't stop her per se. Uh, and then she kept doing it. And then her first album is essentially an emo album. It was 97. Um, Phenomenal. Still her best album for sure. But then she had that one song where she's like, la, 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 like that. That took her off, and Americans loved it because she did an English version. And then she blew up. The whole Latin market exists because of her, essentially now, or at least in America. And then she's 45 now, I think, and just churning out like Billboard top 10 songs, like 4 this year already, and I think 5. And it's like, yeah, and she has a genius IQ, which I find interesting too. Speaks several languages, but I'm going on about this because watching an artist, like she's more than just a singer. Like she dances obviously too, but like you can tell there's an artistic mind behind what she does, and I respect the shit out of it because she's clearly talented. And then she like all the marketing and stuff she did, like she's done well. And I can't think of another artist that I've like followed as closely, but definitely bands that I liked when I was in high school stuff. I listen to them now, or bands that I like now. I'll go back and listen to their old stuff, and like to see that progression is really cool. I just respect people that stick with a craft, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I always knew I wanted to be an artist when I grew up because it's like the one job that you never like go home at the end of the day as an artist. It's like you never stop being an artist. It's like it's one with your identity. It's almost like the work, the output is like some aspect, but like the life itself is the job of the artist in some sense. I always was really attracted to that. Just seems so
for sure.
unifying and easy. It's like it's very easy to be an artist in a sense because you don't have to carry on all these like different identities at once. Like, well, I'm a dentist by day and I work on my cars at night. It's like you're just an artist all the time, and it's much simpler in some sense too.
Yeah. I started all my media that I've been doing now because of grad school drilled that thing into me where it's like I have to be working on that term paper right now. I have to be reading. I have to be doing the background section of my thesis because all your other students or peers were, or supposedly were. They're probably watching Netflix crying too. But then like it just drilled that into me, and I would get home after work because I got a job in archaeology after I got my degree, and I'd get home and I felt guilty not working on something, and it was the weirdest feeling, and I still have it, but I've kind of realized, okay, it's like my videos are artistic, so, or at least I like to think of them as that way, and just like you said, like it doesn't stop. I'm always guilty that I'm not working, but at the same time, I love that because I can stay up till 3 a.m. editing a video and then sleep till 10 the next day, but I still did the same amount of work. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the good guilt.
Yeah. It's a good way to think of it. Good guilt. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if it pushes you into doing what or being who you want to be, it's like, how bad can it be?
It's very true too.
But man, I don't know. We've probably been going for like how many hours have we been here? We should do this again, man. This has been really fun. I really enjoyed getting to meet you. And,
Yeah.
You know,
Oh, sorry.
it's hard to make friends in this world of internet universes, and like I hope we can run into you at some point, at least another podcast down the line, and maybe we can run into you in person at some point. It'd be really cool.
Sure. I was gonna say same to you guys. It's I do like doing podcasts like this because you really get to know somebody. So I would consider you guys friends now.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. But also just wanted to say too, your quality with the camera switching and like the set this is the most produced one I've been on. So congrats. That's cool.
We're just trying to save time so we don't have to edit later.
Is there a button you're clicking to switch the camera? Or
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We've got Nastia's got some buttons for changing the scene in OBS, and then I run the cameras over here, so we can just basically just cut the beginning and end off, and we have a podcast. We don't have to screw around with sitting around watching it all over again some other time. So it's saved us a ton of time. Actually, it just means we can do more podcasts. Is what it comes down to.
We set it up when we moved up to 2 because we used to do 1 every week, and we moved up to 2, and we were like, we cannot do.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah, like doing all this screen switching, and it was just impossible. It's like not fun either. So
yeah,
we just do it live.
Well, I'll have to interview you guys at one point, and once I get to that, and then I'm happy to talk again anytime.
Cool, man. Yeah, I feel like we didn't even get into half the stuff we could have, but
we should talk about we're organizing a conference in Austin in April of next year, and if you wanted to come talk at it and give a talk on the stuff that you're working on, it would be really cool.
Yeah, keep me posted. Send me some stuff.
Awesome.
All right, man.
Cool.
Have a great
Yeah.
rest of your night, and
Yeah, you too.
yeah, take it easy.
Take it easy. Yeah.
Bye.
See ya.
Find them.